Welcome to Real Talk Mormonism 15. This is September 4th, 2024. It's great to have you on board. This is the live call-in show where you can talk to me. I'm D-Vase, the host of the Mormon News Roundup, and we can discuss all things Mormonism, whether you're interested in church history, theology, current events. This show is your platform. We welcome both critics and defenders of the faith. You can join the conversation by joining the link on the bottom of the show. This is your time to shine. Whether you don't know the first thing about the Mormon Church or are currently serving on the church's Strengthening Church Members Committee, which is at church headquarters, there are no dumb questions. Nothing is off limits. Ask me anything. You can stump the chump. No holds barred. Outsmart the know-it-all. No scripts and no rules except for YouTube's terms of service. Simply click on the StreamYard link to participate live and share your thoughts, questions, and insights on anything LDS related. Engage in lively discussions and explore diverse perspectives on Mormonism with this one-of-a-kind interactive call-in show. I don't see anybody necessarily waiting, and that's okay. So a couple of things that I got to remove that off of there. A couple of things that I thought would be interesting. First of all, I do have this thumbnail here that I made, and I do have a couple of different programs that I use to make those thumbnails, and it's always very good. Richard Burnish, welcome to the program. What do you want to talk about, sir?
Hey, why does it say masturbator the bottom left of your camera there?
Oh, yeah, that's because I'm going to be debating Jacob Hansen.
You're going to be masturbating Jacob Hansen?
I'm going to be debating Jacob Hansen. So I am I'm going to be debating him. It's a play on words.
Why are you?
It looks like you got the joke there, Richard.
You're masturbating on stream, and I don't like that. That's kind of...
No, it's just a joke. It seems like you're pretty juvenile out there, but thanks for joining us up there. Yeah, as far as this thumbnail is concerned, this is a live call-in show, so you never know what you're gonna get. You know, some of the juvenile people out there are gonna take their licks. I gotta be better at figuring out how to mute people a little faster there. So I need some more practice on this, no doubt about it. So if you want to join the show, you really need to type into the private chat on the right-hand side there and let me know what it is that you want to talk about now. We released a couple of days ago this incredible video here, an explosive members-only video, over 2 hours of content that you cannot get anywhere else. This is the debate breakdown with me, your humble host here, D-Base, and Colby Reddish, who are going to analyze the Jacob Hansen. Well, we are not going to. We already did. We analyzed the Jacob Hansen and Trent Horn showdown on the Book of Mormon, which just took place about 10 days ago. Right now, this is a members-only video, which means if you want to watch it, you need to unlock it, and you will get incredible perks if you join the membership of the Mormon News Roundup. You'll get exclusive access to this must-see reaction video, where Colby and I deliver expert commentary on the recent Jacob Hansen and Trent Horn debate about the divinity of the Book of Mormon, or you could call it the historicity, depending on how you'd want to define it. This, folks, is the review that you've been waiting for. Your support means everything to us. So you can, if you can just join a member, just for a couple of bucks a month, you will be able to unlock this particular breakdown here, which is a really great breakdown here. There's Colby and I on this particular debate here. Actually, there's a better thumbnail of it right there. So yeah, I'm really hoping I'll get a couple of people to join up on that. It's only a couple of bucks a month. So I'd like to welcome Alan Earthlayer. Hey, thanks for stopping by here. And I also put this out on my channel as well. If you go to the posts on my channel, you'll see that I put in a poll out there. And I'd like to get some people, hopefully, that can take the poll. It says, "Attention, Mormon News Roundup viewers. Welcome, John, to the program. Nice to see you there, my friend. Today, you get to decide which exciting episode will hit your feed this Sunday. Now, should we dive into the extreme and intriguing world of personal limits with a detailed look at my intensive 28-day fast on the Latter Daily Digest with Gene Judson and Maven? Or would you prefer the Colby Reddish and I breaking down the engaging Jacob Hansen and Trent Horn debate? Your vote will determine which episode goes live, so let us know your preference and stay tuned for a great discussion based upon your choice." So once again, whatever the choice is, whatever it is voted, that is what I'm going to release on Sunday. So this episode here, Facing Death and Pushing Human Limits here, this was an incredible interview that I had on Latter Daily Digest, where I talked about my 28-day fast, where I did not eat anything at all for 28 days. So do you want to hear about that, or do you want to hear about the Jacob Hansen and Trent Horn debate breakdown? As of right now, the most of the people want to see the Hansen and Horn debate. But if you cannot wait, if you join the Mormon News Roundup membership, you will be able to watch that immediately. Unfortunately, this particular Real Talk Mormonism is going up against is going up against Mormonism Live, and they've got like 450 people out there. So that's going to be tough to compete with. But I can't, there's great Mormon content every single night. There's the Mormonish podcast, there's Mormon stories, there's lots of different debates and things. I can't schedule around everybody else's programs. Lisa, welcome to the program. It is nice to see you. Now, I have been preparing, probably one of the biggest things that I have been doing is, like this guy who came on earlier, who seemed to want to talk about masturbating, where master debating, a slight difference in between the two. Yes, I certainly did accept this debate with Jacob Hansen. And the title that my understanding of the debate is building Mormon temples, the single best way to alleviate poverty. And I'm so glad that I actually released this out there, because I've gotten so many comments from people who are basically crowdsourcing and helping me come up with my reactions. And I really want to go over some of the comments that are associated with this video, because they're really, really good. So let's check out the comments that go along with the this video, and I want to react to most of them. So some people say there's many reasons not to engage Jacob Hansen, but Mark Twain expressed the primary one perfectly: never argue with an idiot. They will drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. I disagree. First of all, I don't think that we should be using ad hominem and calling people idiots. We can have strong disagreements, but I don't think there's a reason for name calling. I try to avoid that. I'm not perfect at it, but I definitely try to. As far as dragging people down, I had an old boss that says it's hard to soar with the eagles if you're down here with the turkeys. But I think it is a worthwhile debate, so I'd like to give it a shot. And actually, the more that I have been doing the research for this debate, the more that I think that there is some substance to this debate. So I am glad that I took up the challenge. Oh, by the way, in the background here is the Payson, Utah temple back when it was almost on fire. I used to live in Payson, Utah, so that's why I chose that. Let's look at a couple of the other comments here. That's it. I love your podcast, and I listen to it quite often, several times a week, even though I don't comment. Well, that is very kind of you. If all of you out there could like and subscribe, that would mean a great deal to me. It certainly helps the podcast out a ton. But hey, even if you watch without commenting, that's okay too. Good luck, Dives. That means a lot to me. Jacob doesn't believe that contention is of the devil, but he debates via verbal blitz, being so domineering that no one else can speak. He looked ridiculous when he was debating Jim Bennett. And I agree, that particular debate that he had between himself and Jim Bennett over the conservative or LGBTQ aspects of the church that was moderated by Steve Pinecker was a debacle. It was one of the most popular videos of all time, though. That was a bad look for Jacob, but the moderation by Steve was an abject failure. I thought that the moderation there was very poor. Jacob ran over Jim, and that's why you have a moderator, is to prevent those things. But Steve didn't do anything, so that's a problem. And yet Jim Bennett was the one yelling and pulling out his hair. And once again, I say competent moderators are supposed to make sure that debaters have equal time. Hey, Eric, welcome to the program. It is nice to see you here. Hey, Eric, if you join the actual link on the bottom of the program, sir, that's how you can interact with me and we can discuss what you wanted to talk about earlier. So you right now are in the live chat, and I appreciate that, but you need to put that cut and paste that link into your browser so you can join the show so that we can have a more robust conversation. If that is possible, I would appreciate that, because Mr. Red has some good information out there. Once again, this is Real Talk Mormonism 15 live calls and conversations on StreamYard. It's great to have all of you with me. There's not very many, but that's okay. Now, I like this next comment here. The beacons have been lit and Gondor calls for aid. That's an old reference to the Lord of the Rings. That's awesome. And of course, the only possible response to that is, and Rohan will answer. Muster the Rohirrim. Didn't the guy who played the king there, he passed away, didn't he? I believe that he did. Now, a couple of more comments here regarding this, and I'm really glad that I put this out here, because you guys are helping me crowdsource and think about my responses, so which is great. It's an interesting concept that building giant mega structures where magic rituals are practiced and only those who pay 10% tax on anything they receive can enter is the greatest anti-poverty program the world has ever known. I agree with you, Steve, that it is an interesting argument. You can make the argument that building a giant structure provides local jobs, but I've heard that the church uses its own contractors, which are not from the local area. So there's no doubt that building a temple, which costs about $50 million, you're going to have to pay that to the contractors. So, yes, it will. I mean, you're having a transfer of wealth that's going from the church to a contracting firm. There's no doubt about that. I have heard that the church uses its own contractors, which are not from the local area. It really depends because the church doesn't have contractors in every single country in the world, and it doesn't have it in every single municipality. So sometimes they have to use the local contractors to build these temples. And we also know that some of the temples the church uses prefabricated temples, specifically in the Montana and Cody, Wyoming temple. And there may be more that are on the way using the Blocks company that is based out of Atlanta. So, this is my response here. I said, that's a good point. The building of temples definitely benefits the contractors, but the subject of the debate is that building temples fights poverty, whereas these contracting companies are typically well off. I don't think that simply the fact that you build a building and that you pay contractors, I don't think that that really gets to the root of poverty, especially since contracting companies are usually worth a lot of money. Now, so the next comment, use a moderator that will jump in when necessary if timed responses go over the question prompt, if not answered. I agree. We need to set up some ground rules. We need to have good moderation. And I expect there to be some structure. And of course, I also expect there to be some back and forth. And I don't anticipate that anybody is going to be traveling for this. So there's always a little bit of lag on Zoom. So there's going to be some challenges, but I'm looking forward to it. Somebody said my response is fantastic. That's very nice of you. At least you have logic on your side. Jacob has motivated reasoning on his side. Interesting. Dude, where is that video from the line? I can't find it anywhere, but I want to watch the whole thing. He's referencing the video where Jacob Hansen called into the line to Matt Dillahunty and Jimmy Snow. By the way, Jimmy Snow is an ex-Mormon and got absolutely crushed. And I referenced that in the debate video. If you go back and try to look for this video that we're talking about right here, which is the accepting the debate video, you'll see at the end of the line that he does indeed get his butt handed to him, which a lot of people appreciate. There's no doubt about that. Earth Flare seems like it creates more poverty, demanding time and money from its members. I'd say I don't know. It's hard to say. These things, people have lots of things that have been studied on both sides, but I just don't know the answer to that. That's a very good question. Now, Jacob didn't see all of us dirt poor married students in BYU in the 70s living in the shadow of the Provo Temple, eating disgusting soy every day, all the while paying a full tithe and building fund. Then there was the missionary fund strapping us even more when we couldn't even afford the correct formula for our baby's allergies. And I responded back that is hard, that is tragic. I lived in BYU student housing as well, and that's nobody should have to live like that. And say this back in the 70s, you also contributed to a building fund because each individual congregation had to pay for not only their temples in the 70s, but I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong out there, but you had to pay into the building fund all the way up until the 80s for maintenance or other things for your local congregation. I don't know the timetable on that at the certainty, but when you're paying money to the church instead of making sure that your baby has food, that's obviously a misguided, you're obviously directing your money in a misguided way. And I said, I'm sorry, so sorry that you had to live through that. And this individual, Carol, responded back, thank you. The so-called church doesn't care one iota about the poor members or not. It gives out a pittance of its wealth to look good. There is zero love involved among the hierarchy. There are many wonderful rank and file members who are truly loving and giving despite their humble circumstances. If only we could help them see all their bondage. I do think that the church leaders care about the poor. There's something about, I definitely do think that they care, but they just don't care very much. If they cared more, then the church would be externally audited. That way we could confirm what the church is doing to help other people. According to the best available data, for every $122 that the church puts into its investment firm, it only sends $1 to alleged humanitarian giving. That is a shocking level of disparity. So the church cares, but the question is that their priorities, they don't care enough. Now, sadly, someone said it continues today with students dipping into their student loans to pay an inflated tithe. And that is terrible to put people in that kind of position. Mind you, the first presidency stated explicitly in the 1970s that the methodology for determining one's income and therefore one's tithing was strictly personal. And that official statement is still in active reference today. I believe what you're saying there. I'm not personally familiar with that particular statement. I would like to hear about that. That's why I posted back, can you send me a link? But they haven't done that yet. Now, the debate topic for Paul says the debate topic should be D-base does nothing to alleviate poverty. I do wonder about that. Now, all I have to do, by the way, to prove that to the contrary is provide receipts for even 1 penny to a humanitarian organization or a nonprofit that is engaged in poverty fighting. And I don't even need to do that much because I could just say over the radio, everybody out there, give a donation to, and I'll say that right now. Everyone who's listening to this live chat or this program in the future, please contribute to any reputable charity that is externally audited, whose purpose is to lift people up and get people out of poverty. Even me saying that is a demonstration that I can win that topic. And let's just be very, very honest here. It's really not about me. People always want to turn it back on the messenger. It doesn't matter how much money I give away as far as this debate is concerned. That's irrelevant. My criticism still stands whether I'm a very generous person or whether I am an absolute Scrooge. So my personal conduct here is irrelevant. And quite frankly, so is Jacob's as well. Now, this next one, please have Jacob clarify the position he wants to debate because is the temple and its covenants the greatest anti poverty program ever? Is not the best way to articulate the position you are defending or proposing. Now, I really agree with this. We've got to nail down the exact verbiage of the debate because if it's the temple and the covenants, that starts to get pretty vague here. I'd rather just have it be something that we can measure like temple. So we've really got to nail down we've really got to nail things down. Next person, I don't even think this is a position that the prophet would be willing to take. You're right about that. And I've got a couple of videos you can see on the top of the screen that I've got queued up here. And I am going to get to what President Nelson has to say about that if we don't have enough calls at the end of the show. But you're right. President Nelson does not take up this position, at least not in the way that you think. He does and he doesn't. It's very interesting. I have a video that's going to break that down for you. Now, he says it's so outlandish simply by virtue of relief for poverty not being a topic that is discussed as the desired outcome of temple building outside of generally blessing the area. So we know that typically when a temple is constructed in an area, usually the homes that are around it go up in valuation. And I was actually giving that some thought today. So it maybe say a temple brings up the prices, at least in North America, of the closest 100 homes in the area. I would say that that would be pretty reasonable. And let's say it gives them a 5% bump. But the problem here is that the average home in North America is maybe $500,000. So 5% of that would be what? 10% would be like $25,000. So you have 100 of those homes times by $25,000. That's $2.5 million. But a temple average in North America costs about $30 million. So you're only raising the property values by $2.5 million. That's not very impressive at all. So we really have to compare. If you're going to say that the building of temples is the greatest poverty fighting, you have to compare the return on investment of other items that we know do affect poverty, like vaccines. So you have to look on the return on investment. If a temple costs 30 million and vaccines cost 30 million, which one of those is helping poverty more? You have to have an analysis here in order to be able to claim that temples do more. What about giving out microloans? What about digging wells? What about direct food support to people? All these things need to be considered. This is going to be a fascinating thing to research. And let's see here. You've accepted the easiest challenge ever. See, when I originally accepted this, I really did think it was quite an easy challenge. The more that I have dug into this, the more I have realized that there is more to meets the eye on this particular debate challenge. I thought it was going to be a slam dunk, but I'm having to do a lot of research here that has got me a little bit concerned. You've accepted the easiest challenge ever. Can you see that? I just want to make sure that that's big enough. Sorry. Let me scroll down. Hopefully these are big enough for you to see. Yeah, that's right. That makes me worry that he'll simply not engage the actual issue and play hide the ball with counterpoints that you bring up based on his previous performances. Now, I have watched a number of Jacob's debates over the years, or I guess in the last year or so. And what Jacob typically likes to do is that he typically likes to make the burden of proof go to his opponent. But there's no doubt that he has the burden of proof here. I'm going to be very strict on making him prove or provide good evidence for his assertion. Prove is the wrong word. Sorry about that. I do have some friends and occasionally some family. Okay, so your point about the burden of proof will be crucial in reminding him and the audience throughout the debate that he has made the claim and needs to show receipts, or his claim can be dismissed with as much evidence. I agree. Best of luck. I don't think you'll need it. I do think that I'll need it. I haven't done a debate in a very long time, and Jacob has done tons of them. He's extremely forceful, and I'm actually pretty chill. You might have figured that out. So you sometimes get these trolls on here, and I've got to work better on getting these trolls out of here. This is like debating a Scientologist regarding whether or not L. Ron Hubbard is a good person. Well, I disagree with that, because whether L. Ron Hubbard is a quote unquote good person is a matter of subjective opinion. Whether temples actually contribute to alleviating human suffering is something that can be objectively studied, especially with regards to the socioeconomic status of the people in the community. This is another thing that I was thinking about as well, is that you could do a study of the socioeconomic status of a community before a temple went in and then after a temple went in, and you could see if it affects it. My gut intuition is that it would do almost nothing for that community, but I don't know the answer to that yet. Okay, what else? You'll easily win according to the vast majority of those who see it, but you'll have no chance of moving anyone who drinks Jacob's Kool-Aid. Well, I want to, in this debate, we're going to have a crown a winner. What I want to do is crown a winner. You can have a YouTube poll at the beginning and you have a YouTube poll at the end. Whoever moves the needle more in the debate, which I don't think anyone's going to move it very much, but I do think that some people are undecided, or hopefully some people's arguments are convincing. I'm hoping that mine will be convincing and that we can have people who will change their mind. And this is the entire point of a debate, is that we are to get further light and knowledge that the Father promised to send to us by hashing out our ideas. If my ideas are insufficient or poor, or I cannot articulate them, shame on me. Take a couple of the other comments here. Jacob is a good speaker, but I suspect that he would not fare so well in a written debate. Now, this isn't going to be a written debate. It's going to be an oral debate. The debate with Jacob is a no-win situation, even if you win. I disagree. I think that someone can win, and hopefully the best ideas will emerge victorious. DVAs, I feel like he's going to focus on the statistics about the finances of active Latter-day Saints versus the population as a whole. And that is what I am starting to realize, is that he's going to try to argue, in my opinion, the so-called prosperity gospel, which is that Latter-day Saints are divinely blessed for engaging in temple rituals and by paying tithing. But the problem here is that you have to provide a correlation. You have to provide a causation, meaning that you have to definitively tie it to the temple. I don't see how that you can possibly do that. In fact, let's just imagine for a minute that Latter-day Saints are the most wealthy in the United States. That's actually not true, but let's just assume that they are. How then do you tie that into temple rituals? How do you prove that it is caused by the rituals and not because of something, some other intrinsic part of being a Mormon, such as the building of communities, such as the ability to have fast offering, which is where members give to other members, or sometimes you even have bishops or stake presidents who help a family who's unemployed or doesn't have enough food, and you can pay their rent checks or give them food. All of those naturally will help be a buffer and will improve a community's socioeconomic status. But that doesn't have anything to do with the temple. Fast offerings are not tied to the temple. Having your bishop pay your mortgage check if you lose your job is not necessarily tied to the temple. So there's a lot of work that he's going to need to do to establish these things. I feel like two things refute that. As you pointed out in your video, Latter-day Saints are such a small segment of the population that even if temples made them rich, it does nothing for the broader community. And that's the other fact, is that if temples only bless Latter-day Saints, that's a very, very small population. In fact, in the United States, the Cooperative Election Survey says that in the last approximately 150 years, in the last 15 years, the church affiliation in the United States has dropped by 50%. I guess no one is calling in, so I can take these off for a minute. So if so many people are disaffiliating, and Latter-day Saints represent a very small portion of the United States population and even the global population in general. And if only a few 100,000 temple recommend holders can go into a temple, then this anti-poverty program, which is running up into the approximately $13 billion. So there's either broken ground, already constructed, or announced temples. The total price tag of the church's temple program is about $13 billion. And every single year, it costs $250 million to maintain those temples, either through renovation or doing the landscaping or paying for repairs and things like that. But if you took that $13.5 billion and you would have spent it on something else, it would have affected not only just a small portion of the population, which is the Latter-day Saints, but it could have affected, the entire society as a whole. $13.6 billion is an absolutely tremendous sum of money that could do a serious amount of good. And right now, it is mostly just being plowed into temples. Eric Red, I'm still hoping that you will come on, sir, and educate me, by the way, because we talked a little bit earlier today. Will they be paying us back a dividend since our tithing is poured into investments in strip malls instead of charity? And will it be taxable? That's interesting. What do you mean? I'm not quite sure what you mean about that, because the church doesn't pay dividends to anyone. There's no stockholders or stakeholders in the church. Yes, it's turned out that a lot of church money goes into investments, and we have a number of copycat lawsuits, 9 in particular, that have been rolled into Salt Lake City under the auspices of Judge Shelby, in order to determine that if the church has engaged in fraudulent actions. Specifically, a number of these plaintiffs have argued that the church has made claims in bad faith. They were saying that the church manuals and church teachings consistently said that when you give your donations to the church, that they would be used to alleviate human suffering. But it turns out that the best available information that we have is that most of it just goes into Ensign Peak or for other church operations, and that's not what people signed up for. Like the story of the dad that wasn't able to attend his daughter's wedding unless he paid back his tithing he didn't make for 2 years. That's right. You typically don't get to attend your children's weddings unless you're a full tithe payer, which of course requires a lot of money. I run the Mormon movie reviews every Monday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the most successful movie of all time is not Avatar. It's not Avatar 2. It's not Titanic. It's not Avengers Endgame. The movie that has the most amount of sales and box office returns is the LDS Temple Endowment film, because you have to pay 10% perpetually and continuously to be able to watch that movie. How many people have watched that movie? How many millions of people? I'm just guessing here that the total number of people who have watched that movie. Now, the original movie was shot in 1953 under the direction of Gordon Hinckley in preparation for the church's new temple, which was going to be dedicated in Switzerland. And that temple was going to be too small to have multi-rooms, so they needed to have a concept whereby they could show the entire endowment in multiple languages in a small area and not have to go from room to room like you did in some of the other temples, like the Manti Temple or the Logan Temple or the Salt Lake Temple. So how many people since 1953 until today, 70 years approximately, how many faithful active Mormons have actually seen that film? And I would guess that it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 50 million. And if all of them are paying 10% tithing to watch that movie for a lifetime, we're talking about box office returns that are off of the chart. And Mark Crispin, welcome to the program. You're my bodyguard. I'm going to need a bodyguard. There's no doubt about it. I did like the Midnight Mormons back when they were the Midnight Mormons and they debated Radio Free Mormon. They wore those bulletproof vests, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. I thought it was funny. I think they should have taken them off halfway through, but I thought that was a nice touch. So Eric Red, so God is withhold blessings, prosperity from those who do not want to join a secret society that was clearly stolen from Masonry. So God is withholding blessings and prosperity from, see, that is the argument here that Jacob is making. That's correct. That would be the argument that Jacob makes, is that in order to be blessed by God, you need to enter into these quasi-Masonic rituals, as I call them, warmed over quasi-Masonic rituals. And hopefully you can go in the office and see you can log in. Hopefully Mr. Red here can educate me. He's got some very interesting things for me to talk about. Let's continue on with these comment sections. I appreciate that. Thanks for everybody for stopping by. We're going to keep things on the chill. Colby Reddish, my man, thank you very much. Colby, if you want to join the program, we're talking about the debate here with Jacob Hansen and the is building of LDS temples the most best way to fight poverty on this planet. I'd be grateful to hear anybody's thoughts on this particular topic or anything else Mormon related. In the meantime, we're going to continue walking down these comments. I'm not sure what will come from in the debate. Post responses to his BS. Don't waste your time with someone fooled by LDS leaders. And people have a lot of enmity towards Jacob Hansen. He really has a lot of people's goats, especially in the ex-Mormon community. I think he is, persona non grata. But I intend to keep my bearings here. I intend to keep this as an elevated debate, and I think that we can exchange pleasantries and that we can have a war of ideas and not a war of insults and aggravated personal attacks. I had Jacob Hansen on the Mormon News Roundup once upon a time, and I didn't really push back on any of his ideas because I just didn't really want to, and we had a perfectly affable time. And I will note that when it comes to Mormon and ex-Mormon podcasting, I have noticed an incredible double standard, which I had no idea about before I got into this particular, before I got into podcasting. I've had so many faithful people on my channel from every stripe. I've had Jim Bennett, I've had Steve Pinecker, I had Mike over at Latter Day Conversations. I've had Patrick Mason, I've had Jana Reese. I've had lots of people on who you could say were quote unquote faithful Mormons, but I've had Greg Madsen, but I have never once been invited back. And that's because they're welcome to come onto your channel to spread the further light and knowledge that they want to send to you, but you will never be invited back. This is the same thing with the Cultural Hall podcast with Richie Stedman, who's done like 2,000 episodes, who does Mormon news. He was welcome to come on mine, but he has never in 2,000 episodes had an ex-Mormon onto his podcast, and he never will. And that's just an incredible double standard. Hi, Colby. What a strange Mormon Stories podcast. Okay. Jacob thinks very highly of himself. Obviously, when it comes to any theist claims here, there's a certain arrogance that comes with a religion, because religion tells you to pretend to believe things that you don't actually know. Actually, it teaches you to tell people that you know things that you don't actually know, and that you have certain knowledge that they don't have and that they can't obtain. It's inherently arrogant. Whereas people who have a scientific method or grounded in reality, I'm always waiting for my beliefs to be challenged and for them to be falsified, and so that I can adopt more correct beliefs. But Jacob Hansen and others say that they have the correct beliefs and there's nothing that could falsify their position. Therefore, that comes off as inherently arrogant. And of course, the irony here is that atheists are typically the ones who are accused of being the most arrogant of all, that they're not humble before God. Oh boy, what can I tell you? His claim came out of nowhere. It certainly did, and he's the only person on earth who believes it. That may be the case, although I recently did a review of the the Truth and Light letter, and it seems like that prosperity gospel has got to be what he's going to be arguing for. Some apostles said paying tithing was the best or fastest way out of poverty. I'm going to talk about that too, because President Nelson has talked about how tithing affects poverty, and I have that queued up as one of my clips here coming up. I'll be interested to see how Jacob backs up this ridiculous claim when no expert or even LDS prophet or apostle takes the same. And to my knowledge, there's never been a sociological study that has really talked about this issue very well. Although a listener today sent me a doctoral dissertation which took a look at temples, tithing, and socioeconomic status, which I'm going to review if we have time for this evening. So let's see here. Run, dives, run. He's vile and nasty. And see, this is the rhetoric that we don't need, folks. Patricia, we don't need to call anybody names. What we need to do is separate people's beliefs from the person that they are. If people have incorrect beliefs, or in the case of Jacob, bigoted beliefs, we need to separate that from the person and say that his beliefs are incorrect, but we don't need to insult him personally. And that's why I tweeted back to her. I said, you know what? We don't need any name calling out here. And she said, you know what? Yeah, you're right. That's beneath me. Let's keep this elevated, folks. Jacob, either you are reaching too far or you're purposely stalk opponents who you know you can beat. Hey, man, come on. I take offense to that. Who says that Jacob can beat me? Come on. Cut me a little bit of slack here. Debate someone you're equal. Otherwise, you're just a bully. Aloha. Am I not Jacob's equal? Man, the haters out there. I'll tell you what can I tell you? Not a good idea to talk with Jacob. He makes me sick. This is who we need to talk to. We need to have these discussions with people, folks. We need to be able to have these ideas out in public. And there's no reason for this kind of animus. Jacob should debate Maven. She will put him to shame. And I do happen to know that for a fact here, who Mark, hey, thanks. Welcome to the program once again. Maven is not going to debate anybody. Now, Maven did go on to Porch Time and have a rather rigorous interaction with Flip and the rest of those Porch Time guys, Chris Hanna and um what's Jared Higdon. But she really regrets doing it. And of course, that was also poorly moderated. So I don't think she's going to be debating anyone anytime soon. And that's what I said, Maven won't debate anyone. And Jared replied, Maven doesn't debate. She moralizes and chastises. I can't disagree with you, Jacob. That's actually probably pretty accurate. Now, Jacob's position is ridiculously lacking incredible evidence to support his position. I do believe that that is true. And in fact, in the preliminaries here, I asked Jacob, I said, can you please send me or at least give us some hint of the information that you're going to be doing? Can you give us a hint? He will not give a hint. He will not let any of his cookies out of the bag. So that's unfortunate. He will struggle to demonstrate truth, as he said temple building is the most effective way to address poverty. Be intellectually honest and let the chips fall. That is hopefully one of my hallmarks, is to be intellectually honest. That's what I try to do. Now, sometimes I come up short, but that is certainly my lofty ideals. Oh, he's planning a big debate gotcha reveal, which means he auto wins. So exciting. I think you should debate him while looking into a white hat. Very amusing. That's a good one. Jacob likes to make his opponents give material proofs. Well, listen, proofs are only valid in mathematics. We are not going to be proving anything in this debate whatsoever. What we're going to be doing, hopefully, is that Jacob is going to be providing his evidence for his worldview, and then we are going to be able to examine the evidence. Proofs are only valid in mathematics. So while defending his side with dogmas, that's exactly what's going to happen, is that religion gives you a prescribed, typically holy book or set of instructions that are dogmas, and they are not to be questioned. And that's where we get down in Oaks. It's wrong to criticize leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true. It looks like I got a little bit of lag out there. Am I doing okay out there, folks? I certainly hope that I am. In this debate, he'll use property values around the temple. And see, that could be a thing. There's no doubt about it that a lot of temples, which the church typically builds temples in residential areas, in very high income residential areas. They don't build them in the inner cities. They build them on the outskirts. That's what we've seen in Fairview. That's what we see in Washington, D.C. That's where we've seen it in so many places. But that's not really a poverty fighting program, because those usually white suburban areas are among the highest socioeconomic status to begin with. That's hardly a poverty fighting program. And it's only going to raise the property values, as I said earlier, for the homes that are immediately surrounding it. And I cannot imagine that the effect would be more than a couple of $1 million. Now, like I said, you could take a look at the property values of an area before a temple came in, and then after a temple came in, and then compare it and see what the return on the investment was. But I don't think it'll be anywhere near the approximately $30 million that most North American temples cost. So I don't think that that is a sound argument. Jay, let's see here. Look at all of the property ownership around the temple due to the church's insider information getting bought and improved. A lot of these temples are donated to the church by wealthy members as well. This is not making a people more prosperous, though. Then he'll try to show a correlation, which isn't necessarily meaningful, between a country's GDP and when they get a temple. That's going to be a tall order, because you have an entire country. I don't think that that's a great argument there. Of course, it's equally as likely the church chose it because they were already a country on the rise. And what I've also pointed out here is that in a place that has the highest concentration of temples, which is in the state of Utah, which has either 30 temples which have been announced, or already the ground has been broken, or that are already open, the unfortunate reality is that Utah has the highest rate of bankruptcy in the nation. Now, I cannot prove a causation, but there certainly seems to be a correlation here between people who give discretionary income to a multi-$100 billion mega corporation and their financial struggles. There's no doubt about that. Now, I have queued up a couple of clips here that talk about tithing and Mormon prosperity gospel. Again, this is Real Talk Mormonism number 15. If you follow the link into the program, you can join your humble host here. And I welcome the haters and anybody who wants to push back, but we do need to talk about something Mormon related. If you want to talk about this topic or anything else, just follow the link to the show. We'd be delighted to have you on the program. I got a couple of clips here queued up that are going to talk about tithing and the temple, supposedly the blessings that come from paying tithing to the church. Elder Johnson, tithing grants you physical and temporal blessings. Don't pay and you miss out. Guys, I don't want to miss out. So let me hear what Elder Johnson has to say here. This was in a general conference talk some years ago.
My remarks this afternoon are in.
Oh man, that wasn't good. Let's try this again. I could not hear that. I don't know if you could hear that. I got to try this one more time here. Hopefully. Sorry. Okay, I think I got it this time here, folks.
Intended as an invitation to those who have not yet gained a personal testimony of the full payment of tithing. A lack of compliance with this eternal law is not to be taken lightly and can not only seriously impair our spiritual growth and development, but can also limit the physical and temporal blessings that we could otherwise enjoy. As President Spencer W. Kimball once said, quote, "The Lord herein makes clear that tithing is his law and is required of all his followers. It is our honor and privilege, our safety and promise, our great blessing to live this law of God."
The Lord has not made it clear at all that tithing is his law. He could certainly, as the maximally powerful, at least the Mormon God is maximally powerful, Lord of the universe, make that abundantly clear. But instead, it has not been made clear. Instead, it has just been revealed to Mormon prophets. And the connection between the divine commandment of the supernatural origin of these commandments has not at all been established. You've asserted that there is a divine connection here without connecting the dots, which is what General Conference is all about, is making assertions in absence of evidence.
To fail to meet this obligation in full is to deny ourselves the promises and is to omit a weighty matter. It is a transgression, not an inconsequential oversight.
It's interesting that he uses the word transgression here, which in Mormon parlance is actually slightly less than a sin. I don't know if that was deliberate, but you're claiming that this is a transgression against God. Once again, this is another claim. Can you actually demonstrate that God is offended when we don't pay tithing? I doubt that you can. I got plenty more clips where that came from. Let's hear from our everybody's favorite prophet in waiting, Dallin Oaks. Pay tithing or else.
Some time ago, I was speaking to a meeting of church leaders in a country outside of North America. As I spoke about tithing, I found myself saying something I had not intended to say. I told them the Lord was grieved that only a small fraction of the members in their nations relied on the Lord's promises and paid a full tithing.
Very few people in the entire world pay a full tithing to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The best available estimates say that about 1 million people pay any tithing at all. And this is off of an 8 billion total population of the earth. This is an incredibly small amount of people.
I warned that the Lord would withhold material and spiritual blessings when his covenant children were not keeping this vital commandment.
Warnings are cheap, my friend. Dallin, anybody can make a warning. I'm going to warn Dallin that if he doesn't, if he doesn't give me a Costco gift card, that his car is going to break down. Okay, there's my warning to him. See, warnings are cheap. Backing it up, that's the harder part.
I hope those leaders taught that principle to the members of the stakes and districts in their countries. The law of tithing and the promise of blessings to those who live it apply to the people of the Lord in every nation. I hope our members will qualify for the blessings of the Lord by paying a full tithing.
I'm sure that you do. Of course, it's all about the money. Keep sweet, pray, and obey. Keep those tithing checks rolling into church headquarters. The best available information that we have is that approximately $7 billion per year is given to the church from these tithing receipts. Hey, Colch, welcome to the program, my man. Great to see you here. And of course, they want to keep that going at all costs, hence the Ensign Peak sham, where they covered everything up in order that the church members would continue to provide donations to the church. Money is the bottom line of almost everything. The church behaves so much like a corporation and so little like a church. It's really a corporation that dabbles in religion rather than a religion that dabbles in business. Now, we're going to keep it up with Elder Oaks. Giving to charity is not tithing, and tithing is not charity. That this is the prosperity gospel. And I guess Dallin Oaks, there's been a lot of people, including people like Jana Reese, who is a faithful member of the church, that after the revelations of David and Lars Nielsen of Ensign Peak's scam in 2019, started coming out with the so-called trendy tithing. And trendy tithing is where you take your 10% and instead of giving it to a mega corporation that does not need your donation, you give that money to actual charities who actually help people in demonstrable ways and are externally audited so that you can have confidence that your meager sums are helping people who are suffering now. And when I had Jana Reese, who does the Religion News Service, she's a correspondent. She's very dedicated. She's written a couple of books. She's got a PhD, really, really smart. She said she had a crisis of confidence after the church and the SEC fine. And she said that her time on this planet is basically very limited and that she has limited resources. She runs an Airbnb, and that's kind of some things that I do too. And I kind of helped her out with a listing a little bit. It was kind of fun to hobnob with her and pretend that I was a big time journalistic colleague. But even though I'm just a C-list podcaster. But the thing about it is that she said, I only have so much money and I only have so many years. And the programs that are very important to her deal with violence of women and sexual harassment, sexual assault prevention, rape shelters, things like that. And when you give a donation to the church, you, of course, cannot direct it in any meaningful way. The disclaimers on the bottom of the tithing make it so that the church has indemnified itself against people it is an attempt for the church to indemnify itself against these tithing lawsuits of saying that, I donated to the church under the auspice that it would be doing good, but it didn't do anything except for build a luxury mall and bail out an insurance company. And Jana Reese says, look, I got to have confidence that my money is being used to help other people. And that's very important to me. And that's where we get the trendy tithing, which seems to be on the rise, where people say, the church has admitted that they don't need your tithing, so I'm not going to give it to the church, especially since we have no transparency. Okay, good to see you here. I'm going to check that out on Colby. I'm going to check that out as far as doing a write-up on Jacob. I really appreciate that. Good day, guys. Hey, Peter, it's great to see you. What a morning for Mormon podcasting, nonstop since 5 a.m. Hey, you get up early, Peter. Welcome to Real Talk Mormonism.
We pay tithing, as the Savior taught, by bringing the tithes into the storehouse.
Wait, as the Savior taught? Jesus said nothing about tithing, my friend. You have this fundamentally misunderstood. And as far as bringing the tithes into the storehouse, that's also a misreading of Malachi chapter 3. He's 0 for 2 on this already. Whoops.
We do this by paying our tithing to our bishop or branch president. We do not pay tithing by contributing to our favorite charities. The contributions we should make to charities come from our own funds, not from the tithes we are commanded to pay to the storehouse of the Lord. The Lord has directed by revelation that the expenditure of his tithes will be directed by his servants.
How do you know that the Lord has directed that? He's asserted that. What's the evidence that the Lord has directed his servants to do anything? Where is the evidence? General Conference, literally, if you had a drinking game with evidence in General Conference rather than claims, you'd never take one drink because General Conference is not at all about evidence. He continues to assert these supposedly divine connections, and there's no good reason to believe that the Lord has done anything, much less directed his shriveled up white guys who live on North Temple to hoard the widow's mite.
The first presidency, the Quorum of the 12, and the presiding bishopric. Those funds are spent to build and maintain temples and houses of worship, to conduct our worldwide missionary work.
Let me just back this up. So, according to the Widow's Mite report, about $1 billion per year goes into the maintenance of the temples and the building of new chapels and things like that. $1 billion out of the $7 billion. And also, similarly, my understanding is that about $1 billion of it goes to the missionary fund as well. Now, that is subsidized partially by the members because missionaries pay between $400 and $500 a month if they're elders or sisters who are in their early 20s or late teens. And usually, senior missionaries pay in between $1,500 and $3,500 a month to serve a senior mission. So that is subsidized. Now, my understanding is that the church subsidizes the $1 billion missionary effort and that the members pay 2/3 of the missionary effort, whereas the church only pays 1/3. That could be reversed, but it's probably somewhat equal. So he's saying what happens with your tithing, and once again, he's making assertions about what happens with your tithing. But because the church is not externally audited, we don't actually know. We just have to take his word for it on blind faith. Call me a skeptic, which is what I am, if I require evidence to confirm all of these claims.
To translate and publish scriptures, to provide resources to redeem the dead, to fund religious education.
Yeah, the funding of the BYUs also is another $1 billion effort. I think it's around $850 million, $950 million to run the BYUs. That's an incredible expense for the church. Of course, the church has BYU Provo, BYU Idaho, BYU Hawaii, and it also has the Pathways program. We're talking about 100,000 students who are currently enrolled in church schools. It's an incredible endeavor, and it is definitely very costly. Now, the federal government helps the church out with, students having Pell Grants, and the church, gets federal grants from the government to do certain research or other initiatives that the church is involved with. But yeah, that's another $1 billion is the BYUs, which the church again subsidized to a high degree. And this time, I believe it is the church that 2/3 of the BYUs, I believe, are paid for by the church, and the tuitions and other donations that are brought in are only 1/3.
And to support other church purposes selected by the designated servants of the Lord.
Other church purposes. You mean like building luxury malls? Is that what you're talking about? Why don't you just tell us? You like your luxury malls. I understand everybody likes a luxury mall. Other church purposes. You mean like bailing out for-profit businesses? Like the church's beneficial life? Is that what you're talking about? If you could only be transparent about all of this, we would appreciate that. And as I've mentioned many times before, it's only a matter of time until we get a thumb drive from someone who gives us all of the church's information about all of the tithing, all of the for-profit businesses, all of everything which is hidden shall be made manifest in the future. In fact, Lars Nielsen himself, he says that he still has tens of thousands of documents that he hasn't released. He's only given us, I think, about 200 pages worth of documents in his letter to an IRS director, but he says he has a thumb drive filled with more. Why not get out in front of it now so that you don't have a crisis of confidence in the members? When you have no transparency and when you've been fined millions of dollars for fraudulently and shamefully hoarding hundreds of billions of dollars, it's going to lead to a crisis of confidence. And he's made all of these assertions. How many assertions did he make without the slightest shred of proof? He said that God has directed tithing and that Jesus talked about tithing. No, Jesus never talked about tithing. And the storehouse that is mentioned in Malachi, he's completely misrepresenting that. He's proof texting Malachi. He's reading modern Mormonism into the Old Testament. Dan McClellan must be absolutely furious at that. Then he said that the Lord has directed his servants. Where is the evidence for that? Then he said that the church expends the funds on this, that, and the other. Where's the evidence for that? We are just supposed to take everything here on blind faith without the slightest shred of evidence. Hard pass. Now, Elder Johnson, pay tithing to get out of poverty. Now we're getting somewhere, folks, because this is really germane to the topic at hand, which is what Jacob Hansen said about the poverty and the church. Does paying tithing help you get out of poverty? Let's find out what Elder Johnson says.
What a marvelous law. He who has not only the power and the means to bless his children temporally and spiritually, but also the desire to do so, has provided to us the key to those blessings that we both need and desire. This key is the law of tithing. Indeed, as stated by President James E. Faust, quote, "Some may feel that they cannot afford to pay tithing, but the Lord has promised that he would prepare a way for us to keep all of his commandments. To pay tithing takes the leap of faith in the beginning."
How do we know that the Lord has Let's back that quote up. How do we know that the Lord has commanded that? That's another assertion here. How do we know that?
All of his commandments. To pay tithing takes the leap of faith in the beginning. We learn about tithing by paying it. Indeed, I believe it is possible to break out of poverty by having the faith to give back to the Lord part of what little we have.
Right, you believe it. That's the entire point of faith here, folks. Faith is the bad reasons that people give when they don't have evidence, or it's a belief in spite of evidence. That's great that you believe that, but why should anyone else believe it? We should only believe things when we have a rational justification for them, not on blind faith because a lawyer, James Faust, believes that if you give money to a mega corporation, that somehow a sky daddy will pay it back to you. That's great that you believe that, but until such time as you can demonstrate the reality of connecting a supernatural cause of you paying tithing and that a supernatural agent then blesses you in some way, either financially or in other ways, then there's no good reason to do it. There's so many assertions here. And don't forget that James Faust also, he had the gold teeth here. I'm sorry to take a little digression here, but he talked about the James Faust and the gold teeth here. Here we go. I've got this one here. This is a article here. Be loyal, worthy to enter the temple, members urged. So this is in Brazil here. More than 3,500 people gathered on a mountainside overlooking the southern Brazil city in 1998 to witness the ceremonial beginning construction of the Porto Alegre Brazil Temple. Hey, Theodus, hey, thanks so much, buddy. Thanks for dropping by. I really appreciate it. Hey, you're too kind, my friend. And this is the amazing thing here about the worldview of James Faust here. The gold teeth in the back. This is what James Faust did to people. It's absolutely incredible here. So Faust emphasized the need for saints all over the world to begin to sacrifice for temple building. He recalled how when the Sao Paulo temple was being built, members in Argentina found ways to donate. And here we get to hear about James Faust's real beliefs here. He said that the Lord would bless you if you pay tithing, but that's not how he behaves. Instead, this is what he asks members to do. Latter-day Saints gave the gold from their dental work to help pay for the temple, said President Faust. He explained that they had purchased some of that gold for more than the market price and has shown the gold fillings to various congregations to illustrate the nature of the sacrifice made for these members. So these Mormons in the late 1990s are literally carving out gold out of the back of their skulls here so that the church could build these temples for these warmed over Masonic rituals to open up the windows of heaven so that people like Adolf Hitler and Vlad the Impaler can go to heaven. And let's not forget Holocaust victims. This is reprehensible because what we know now, again, this article was written in 1998. What happened in the year prior to this in 1997? Well, we had the founding of Ensign Peak during that time. And how much did Ensign Peak have when it started? Well, the best available information that we had said that it was founded with $7 billion. So at the same time here that James Faust is going around and asking people to carve out the fillings out of the back of their heads, and he carries them around in a sack, the church is sitting on $7 billion. And back in the late 1990s, this is at the same time that President Hinckley had started rolling out the small mini temples in exactly that same time frame in 1997 to 2000. And those small mini temples would only cost about $2 million to build. And President Hinckley built like 50 of them. So you can do the math. If they only cost $2 million and there was like 50 of them, we could even bump it up to like $500 million. It's probably not that much. But he's asking for that kind of a sacrifice and then taking them around to other people to guilt trip them. Listen to the rest of this. They gave the gold from their dental work to help pay on the temple, said President Faust. He explained that they had purchased some of their gold for more than the market price. So they literally are overspending here. And then he said, this sacrifice has been a hallmark of the success of members in Latin America. And he used to carry this sack around with him to show other people, to various congregations. How morbid is that? How diabolical is that? How gross. That is absolutely peak cringe. Okay, Mr. Red here. Welcome to the Mormon News Roundup. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. I really appreciate you coming on here. We're taking a small digression.
I'm doing great.
And I do have your document here open. You wanted to talk about Jacob Hansen and do LDS temples, are they the greatest anti-poverty program ever? Are they? What are your thoughts on that? Did I lose you?
Oh,
You're on the air.
sorry, I'm still here. Say that again.
Is building Mormon temples the greatest anti-poverty program in the world?
You know, I've been searching Google all afternoon to find out if that is the most effective way to reduce poverty.
Uh-huh.
And clearly, nobody else in the world is clued into that fact.
Meaning that this doesn't seem to be any sociological studies. There's nothing that's written in journals. All of the major corporations out there that are engaged in the anti-poverty, none of them are talking about it. All of the people that write and have studied this program, studied poverty and how to fight it for their entire lives. Major philanthropic organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Novo Nordisk or some of these other big corporations, none of them even put temples in, not even in the top 5. Not even in the top 10, but building a Mormon temple doesn't even crack the top 100. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Well, as I was looking into it, I couldn't find anything that was definitive that religion had a positive effect on affecting anything to do with poverty. It did say that some of these social benefits could play a factor, but there was nothing that would indicate definitively that religion itself had any impact. Most of the studies reported many studies on it, but really it ended up saying that more studies needed to be done to actually find anything definitive.
Yes, and I want to bring up this email that you sent to me, and you can help explain this to me here. I've got your name on here. It says, based on the summary, you can determine if any specifics from the text will be of help to you. What is this title here that you sent to me about evidence-based dialogue, the relationship between religion and poverty through the lens of randomized control trials? What are you trying to tell me here about this summary from this article?
Oh, you know what? That's the one that I don't have printed out and sitting right in front of me.
Okay, let me read this. So let me read this because this is good stuff here. It says the findings of the randomized control trials may not seem impressive and surprising, which is part of the nature of RCTs. However, they do point to areas where there is clear evidence that religion is a relevant factor in social life and in the conditions that affect poverty. Religions provide resources and open doors, but also place hurdles in the way of poverty alleviation efforts. From the perspective of evidence-generating research, religions can be seen to be especially relevant for questions of poverty as a source of normativity and as a source of motivation. This twofold influence is particularly exercised in the 3 areas of business, finance, politics, culture, education, and health. And here's the final sum up here, and then I'll get your thoughts here. The role of religions can be characterized as relevant, but ambivalent. The ambivalence of the sacred, according to Appleby, does not go away. That is why it will not do to have a dialogue between religions and poverty studies per se. There must be a dialogue that involves the critical reflection on religions, i.e., a dialogue that engages religious studies and theology. There's much more research that needs to be done to understand the intersectionality between religion and poverty, and a lot more thinking and reflecting. To paraphrase Wittgenstein's preface to his Tractatus, the value of randomized controlled trials consists in the fact that when the evidence has been gathered and generated, it shows how little has been done. So what are we supposed to be taking away from this summary here, Mr. Red?
Well, what I took away from it is that it certainly isn't the greatest way for anybody to be removed from poverty. And that as much as people want to imply that it does, these studies do not literally show anything that's definitive that would give anybody any hope that by joining a religion, they would be immediately lifted, or even through great works and effort would be lifted out of their plight.
Yeah, see, obviously religions can can have a positive benefit on on a person's life. For instance, you get a great solidarity when you come together on Sundays or on Saturdays or whenever it is, and join with people in a collective purpose. That can have positive outlook for you. If you lose your job in the Mormon church, sometimes your bishop will help you out and will pay your rent for a little while. That's obviously a buffer and can help you economically. But the problem here that we have a massive trade-off, especially in the Mormon church, where you have to pay 10% of your income. And there are very, very few people who actually end up on the, shall we say, is it on the black side of the equation? Almost everyone ends up on the red side of the equation when it comes to paying money to the church.
Well, the one person that ends up in the black every time is apparently the LDS church, because you don't amass that kind of wealth by being generous with it, apparently. As I looked into this a little bit, the LDS church could literally in 1 year bring everybody up to the poverty line by investing their $100 million in doing that. And there are many studies that show that it would basically take $100 million a year in order to bring everybody up to that line. And then once they get that line, they said there will be residual effects. But, the church isn't even willing to put in 10%. They ask us for 10%, and they ask us to pay generous on what we want to earn from what we want to be blessed with. But apparently they don't want to be blessed with even 10% of the efforts that the members generously give them in both fast offerings and tithing.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Even if we take the 2023 humanitarian report at face value, and it is not externally audited, so we just have to take it on faith, just like we saw from that clip from Dallin Oaks, where he said all of the things that the church is doing, none of that is confirmable, or at least very little of it is confirmable. I mean, we can call up the Red Cross, we can call up the World Food Program, we can call up some of these NGOs that the church gives its money to, and we can confirm that the donations have been given to them. But the problem, as I've pointed out many times, is that sometimes those donations are returned to the church under the table, and then we're not told about that. So almost all of it is unconfirmable. But even if we take the church at its word for the $1.42 billion that it allegedly donated in 2023, that is still less than is 1% of its total wealth, which is probably around the neighborhood of $300 billion. And let's also not forget that the church is now counting the fast offering as part of its own donations, as part of its charity. But donations, as you know, Mr. Red, the fast offering is a member-to-member donation. It's just a pass-through. It's not the church's donation. It's your donation. The church is claiming the fast offerings as its own donations. That's not the way this is supposed to work.
No, not in any way that I truly believe that it would as a believing member.
Yeah. Now, you also sent me this here before we let you go on here. Now, this is really, really interesting here. This is from the Journal of, what is this? JETR. What is that? The Journal of Economics. What is that? JETR?
I apologize. I don't even know without delving into it a little bit more. I have this one printed out in front of me though.
Okay. It is the Journal of Engineering and Technology, JETR. So this is Dallin Overstreet, Arizona State University. Is this a doctoral dissertation, I believe, is what this is?
That's what it looked like to me.
Yeah, it looks like a doctoral dissertation, which is very interesting here because I've never even seen anything get close to this. Look at this title here that you sent to me. The Elusive Economic Blessings of Tithing, Mormon Temples, and County Poverty. Very interesting stuff. Let's just look at the abstract, which is not too long here. This is obviously like a 20-page document. We can't go through all of it. But the paper examines the relationship between Mormon temples and county-level poverty rates in the United States. That's fascinating. Look, we're getting closer to the debate topic. Where'd you come up with this? Did you just Google it or what?
Well, like I said, I was Googling the one way that the world could remove the poverty from our civilization, and nothing came up. So then I just got a little bit more specific and looked at different things that people were saying about the temple, paying tithing, and just found lots of different studies. But really, clearly nothing came up. There's no definitive proof of anything. The only thing that I can even come close to thinking that Jacob might want to argue is that the law of consecration would be the single greatest way that we could get out of poverty. However, if you look at the law of consecration, the church, we're not living it. We make a covenant. See, that's one of the things Jacob could say, is that we make a covenant in the temple to consecrate all that we earn and may ever earn to the benefit, to the building up of the kingdom.
So you mean like the old style Signy Rigdon law of consecration, not the law of consecration that you that you do in the temple, but where we have all things in common and this communal living where there's no poor among you.
I really believed when I was going to the temple that there would come a day when it would evolve back into that, for sure. Mm-hmm. But we look at that, and so the church, with the church is stingy we give them 10%, they give 1% back to the world. I can't imagine that I would trust them with consecrating everything and expect that we're going to walk out as equals. That just doesn't seem feasible. That we trust these prophets and apostles so much that there's nothing that they could do that would shake our faith. And then the one thing that happens to get leaked in the last 20 years about the church, and it has to do with how our leaders have been dishonest with the disposition of the tithes. And I can't see how anybody can overlook that in any way that holds these men up. All that proves to me is that if we could look deeper into that dark hole, what nefarious things are going to jump out at us. And so to think that our church is going to somehow sweep us into this era, this world of living the law of consecration, where it's perfectly executed the way that God would institute it, as we covenanted in the temple to do so, I have no confidence in anything like that.
Yeah, and you have to demonstrate, once again, Jacob's got to demonstrate that living this law of consecration will lift all boats, but that's just purely a theoretical at this point.
Absolutely.
And it's something that you would need to be able to demonstrate, which I don't think that he can do. But let's keep going on this. This is very interesting. The Mormon Church teaches that obedience to the law of tithing, which requires members to donate 10% of their income, can break the cycle of poverty. Using the presence of a temple as a proxy for tithing participation, I test whether counties with temples exhibit lower poverty rates than comparable counties without temples. Fascinating stuff here, Eric. Very nice. Let's keep going. Employing several different difference in difference models on county level data from 2010 to 2018. This paper finds this is it. This is the big one. Look at this. What does that say? This paper finds no statistically significant evidence that temples reduce poverty rates. What is that telling us, Eric?
They're not looking hard enough. That tells me all they need to know about this claim of Jacob's, anyway.
Let's keep going here. This is absolutely great here. The results suggest that the presence of a temple has no effect on county level economic outcomes, contrary to Mormon doctrinal claims about the power of tithing to alleviate poverty.
Yeah.
This finding is likely attributable to the way in which the church allocates tithing revenues, a highly centralized and hierarchical affair with no clear mechanism to reduce poverty in the communities from which the funds are sourced. Now, what is he saying in this last sentence here about the fact that the church, the way that it allocates its resources back to the communities, it's not focused on who is in poverty. It's just focused on balancing the ward budgets, right?
Well, it's about people making decisions that work for their benefit as they're serving in those leadership positions. I mean, I've been in a bishopric where there were $40,000 spent for the welfare of a young man who needed to enter a home, and then I know of other people who were turned down for the most basic things because they wanted to push back on them, that their family needed to jump in and step in and help. So yeah, there is no definitive way of predicting how the church is going to invest our money into whatever they may deem beneficial to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to be reading this entire thing here. This is very, very interesting here. I'm just going to read just a little bit more of this, starting in this here, and you can jump in here because this is kind of debate prep. I guess we're doing it in public, but I really appreciate that. Mormon scripture states that people paying their tithing breaks the bands of poverty. I wasn't aware of that scripture here. I guess I was never a big prosperity gospel guy. I never really linked the two together.
No,
but I guess
that wasn't why I was in the church.
Right. Yeah. And I think very few people would join for that particular reason. Church leaders frequently echo this claim, assuring members in stark terms that faithfully donating 10% of their income will help them overcome financial challenges and break the cycle of poverty. President Nelson, whom Mormon church leaders believe to be God's chosen prophet on the earth today, specifically the members in Africa, that we preach tithing to the poor people of the world because the poor people of the world have had cycles of poverty generation after generation. That same poverty continues from one generation to another until people pay tithing. How do you feel about that quote there?
Well, I think the first time that I understood that that was something that church leaders were thinking was that talk where they're addressing the members in Africa and saying the quickest way for them to get out of poverty is by paying their tithing.
Right.
And I was blown away by that statement, really.
Yes. Now, if you go back, see, when President Nelson took the reins in 2018, the first thing that he did is that he went on a world tour because he knew that this would be his only time because he was like freaking, in his 90s. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said freaking, but he's in his 90s. Yeah. So when he went to Africa, recently, this is from the church news itself, from the church's website here. Tithing, a blessing from Heavenly Father to help us on our mortal journey. While recently traveling on the African continent, President Nelson said that Africans need to pay to the church to break the cycle of poverty. And the reason that Africa has struggled in times past is because they weren't paying tithing to the church. How do you feel about that claim?
I can't believe that. I guess I can understand it because that's the thinking. He thinks that the gospel principles are the end all be all. And so for him to say that, I think that I'm not surprised that he would say that because he's encouraging people to pay tithing. But the economic reality of that is it's just absolutely false. I mean, there are principles that if people will follow, they can emerge from poverty. But it really does take a helping hand and an effort, a worldwide effort in this case, because we're talking about global poverty, not the poorest among the Latter-day Saints living in Wasatch County or Utah County. The thing that I thought of earlier when you mentioned that we might be talking is that if Jacob is correct and temples and the payment of tithing is the fastest way to get out of poverty, the best way. Why aren't they building temples in the poorest parts of the world with it? If you build it, they will come mentality. But no, the Wasatch Front is overpopulated or overbuilt with temples that 15 temples can be arrived at within 45 minutes of someone living in central Utah County. And so those temples are not there to elevate people out of poverty. They're there to keep the richest and most wealthy members engaged in a system that keeps them paying their tithing. If they drop every temple in Utah and built 10 temples in Africa, and if you build it, they will come. And they truly believed, or as Jacob does, I'm not saying other people believe it, but as Jacob does, that this is the way, then let's start building those temples and just see how quickly they actually raise themselves out of poverty.
And see, this is what happened in the late 1950s under David McKay, is that he built all of the chapels across the world, and he did the "if you build it, they will come" mentality. And what happened is that the church ended up getting about $250 million in debt, which at the time was absolutely crippling. The church almost didn't make its payroll. The "if you build it, they will come" mentality has never worked for the church at all, and it's not going to work in today either. And if you look at the bankruptcy statistics here, and this is also some of the research that I'm doing, if you look at Utah, this particular site here says that the top 5 states with the most bankruptcy. Utah is in the top 12 here of the bankruptcies out of, with a total score of 76 out of 09, and Nevada also. See, these couple areas here is in the Morador, with lots of Mormons here in this particular area. That has a high bankruptcy rate, and that's where the temples are. There's more temples in Utah, Arizona, and in this area than anywhere else. Now, I can't prove a causation, but there certainly seems to be a correlation between high bankruptcies and the close-knit, how many temples you have.
Yeah. Well, sadly, I think we're talking, in some ways that means two different things. We're talking about prosperity, but prosperity in Utah County and having people be engaged in that is completely different than rising people out of abject poverty
Right.
in many, many parts of the world. So to think that somehow that's a good thing, to help white Americans living in America get out of what we call poverty, and not doing the basic things to get other people out of poverty. I've looked at many studies, from the UN, different places, and everyone has a list from 4 to 12 things that we can do
Right.
to raise the poverty level, or lower the poverty level, I should say.
Right.
But none of them involve none of them mention religion. None of them
Yeah.
mention joining a fraternity where you have sacred handshakes and things, and where you pay your tithing to a church that then pays all their basic expenses and pays their mortgage, but has the luxury of slapping it into an investment fund where it will just grow and grow and grow. And then they can buy up property wherever they want, raising the cost of living for people because they have that disposable income to buy up the land and the businesses and the homes. And then it raises the cost of living for everybody else because they're competing with this entity who just has disposable income with no end.
Yeah, it definitely does. Now, if you look at, for instance, I've been doing some of this light. Are you familiar with this Light and Truth letter? This is a very interesting letter. It's basically the answer to the CES letter.
Yes, I've looked at that website a few times.
Yeah, it's very interesting here. I've done a review of this church finances section here, but he brings out a couple of these statistics here, Andrew does, about the socioeconomic status here of the members of the church. So sociologist Tim Heaton reports in Vital Statistics on the subject of Latter-day Saints social life that members of the church have above average socioeconomic attainment. That likely includes both U.S. and non-U.S. countries, though it didn't say that for sure. And the Pew Research Center also reports that Mormons have a higher income rate. And also the Pew Research, here's a Pew Research study that shows that Latter-day Saints are more likely to be wealthy. So my question to you is, if we have a few studies here, Eric, that show that Latter-day Saints have a higher than average socioeconomic status for their current place that they're living in, does that demonstrate that the building of the temples and the covenants that are involved with them lifts people out of poverty?
Well, I think there are so many factors that it would be very difficult to pinpoint that a temple has any real value or benefit. There are just so many factors. I mean, when we're growing up in Utah, I mean, the church has the perfect opportunity to test that kind of a theory. Is you build a temple in the poorest parts of the world, and then you teach these people, you mentor them. You do all of the things that the UN is doing, is recommending that we do. And then you say, well, then they can prove themselves right, basically, because they can manipulate it all and saying, well, it was because of this thing. Meanwhile, they're doing all of the things that all these other world organizations are suggesting. So the church has the perfect opportunity to falsely prove that Jacob is right. But the real world examples that we have is that it has no impact. In fact, it may even have a negative impact because religion seems to require people to toe a certain line, and if they don't, then they're actually shunned and they're kicked out and pushed away from the particular religion that they had found some kinship in the beginning.
And as we covered in some of these general conference talks, there can be a very negative amount of shame. It says that you're not going to go to heaven, that you will
Yes.
not have full fellowship, that you will, you'll be in sad heaven if you don't do these things. And that puts a lot of strain on people, especially since the church often, especially in the 70s and the 80s under President Kimball and President Benson, told mothers in Zion to go home, and that you're encouraged to have basically large families with only one income earner and then give disposable income to the church. That's a recipe for financial heartache. Believe me, I know that firsthand.
Yeah.
And that can possibly explain the high bankruptcy rates in places that have a high Mormon population. Although, again, that is not necessarily a causation, but it is certainly a correlation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one thought, as you said that, I think back to that was it Elder Suarez that mentioned that we should first pay our tithing. If you're making a decision on paying your basic needs, and paying your tithing, always pay your tithing.
Okay, let's cover that while we're
Okay.
on this. This has actually been said a number of times in General Conference, and here we have Valerie V. Corden. Instead of feeding your kids, you should feed the church. This has been brought up a couple of different times, and I do have this queued up.
In my father's factory during vacation, the first question my father always asked after I received my salary was, "What are you going to do with your money?" I knew the answer and responded, "Pay my tithing and save for my mission." After working with him for about 8 years and constantly answering his same question, my father figured he had taught me about paying my tithing. What he didn't realize was that I had learned this important principle in just one weekend. Let me tell you how I learned that principle. After some events related to a civil war in Central America, my father's business went bankrupt. He went from about 200 full-time employees to fewer than 5 sewing operators who worked as needed in the garage of our home. One day, during those difficult times, I heard my parents discussing whether they should pay tithing or buy food for the children. On Sunday, I followed my father to see what he was going to do. After our church meetings, I saw him take an envelope and put his tithing in it. That was only part of the lesson. The question that remained for me was what we were going to eat. Early Monday morning, some people knocked on our door. When I opened it, they asked for my father. I called for him, and when he arrived, the visitors told him about an urgent sewing order they needed as quickly as possible. They told him that the order was so urgent that they will pay for it in advance. That day, I learned the principles of paying tithing and the blessings that follow.
Oh, sorry. So, what message are we getting from this, Eric, as far as what your priorities should be?
Pay your tithing. And I, that I think that's a beautiful sentiment. I mean, I think you could probably feel, hey, that was a wonderful. I would have resonated very much with that talk. But that's not the reality of the way that it's working in our church. If I had heard that gentleman paid his tithing, I think that's beautiful. I think that there's nothing wrong with having a strong faith, but I think it needs to be based in things that are real. Now, if the bishop had turned around and said, hey, this was a test, and he handed him back that money, he would have passed the test brilliantly. He would have learned what he had to do, and he still would have had the money to take care of his family. But that story, if I'm not going too far, that story indicates that there are lots of factors that contribute to poverty. I mean, economic downturn in the community, war and displacement is a huge thing that drives millions of people into poverty almost overnight. And so I would argue that the one thing that we could do is we could end war, and that would impact poverty more than any temple could possibly impact the world. And so there's just lots of factors, and they're cyclical in some cases. There are many things. So you can't predict. You only can be somewhat prepared for whatever downturn you might be facing in your circumstances. I mean, it would be beautiful if we could pay our tithing and all those blessings would just be poured out like they said. There would be nothing more beautiful, but it's not the reality. Sadly.
Let's cover one last part from this. I'm going to read the rest of this some other time here, but this is very good from the elusive economic blessings of tithing. Despite the strong confidence expressed in these doctrinal assertions, scant empirical research has examined whether tithing adherence actually reduces poverty as claimed. Additionally, the church provides no clear causal mechanism for explaining how faithful adherence to this doctrine will produce decreases in poverty. That's what I've been harping on, is causation.
Yep.
While some studies have shown that higher levels of religiosity lead to higher levels of work ethic and thriftiness, which could explain the promised decreases in poverty, less focus has been placed on the use of cases of religious funds generated through the practice of tithing. Quantitative data on tithing amounts paid by individual members is closely guarded by the church. That is, unless it's with Tim Ballard. That's just a small caveat there. That's a small joke there.
Yeah.
With the large majority of financial decisions of the church being controlled by a small group of church leaders, the high degree of centralization in the church's financial management systems has possibly led to a disconnect between the stated goals and actual outcomes when it comes to tithing and poverty. So that's what it says, is that the research here is very scant, and that the causation here has yet to be established. And that's really what I thought that this entire debate is about, is establishing causation. And this particular study says that that has not happened.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, because like I've said a couple of times, is that there are principles that if we follow, that they can lead to us arriving at a better state, whether it's financial, whether it's mental, whether it's this, but those things have to be applied. But once again, if Jacob and or the church want to hijack those things, I guess they can make any claim they want, but they don't own those things, and they aren't unique to them.
Yeah, let me queue up a couple of other ones. I got a few other tithing ones here to queue up. Elder Johnson is back at it again. Pay tithing before any other essential obligations.
There are many reasons that are used to not pay tithing, such as medical emergencies, debts, car and or home repairs, educational expenses, and insurance. These reasons and others like them are very real and are lived and dealt with every day by many, if not most of us. They tax our limited financial resources, and if we are not wise stewards of these resources, may result in the inability to meet our tithing obligation to the Lord. To those who are not yet full tithe payers, I invite you to begin today to pay your full tithing to the Lord through your local priesthood leader. I invite you to pay your tithing to the Lord first, before you meet any other financial obligations. I invite you to put your trust in the Lord, and as he himself said, prove me now herewith. As you do so, and as you place your tithing obligation to the Lord as the first priority of all of your other financial obligations, you will indeed become a witness to the matchless power of the Lord as he opens the windows of heaven and pours out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it.
Yeah, again, this is going back to the idea that, you have obligations, not only for your children, you have healthcare obligations, you have food obligations, you have rent obligations. There's so many obligations that we have in our modern day society, especially in developed countries like where we live in the United States. And to place the church first in those things, that means that it is, to my mind, that means that could cause economic harm to the individuals who's associated with it, because I have not seen data that paying tithing to the church first will help with those other bills. That's a matter of faith, but without evidence, it seems like a foolhardy endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how he says, put your trust in the Lord. Once again, a beautiful sentiment. But then you look at what the church does with theirs. They don't trust that the members will continue to pay their tithing year after year, and that these members will be blessed and their tithing will grow, that the church will grow. What do they put their trust in? They put their trust in the stock market.
Sure,
they put that money in there simply to grow. I mean, disregarding everything that the scriptures actually say, and at least in the way that I interpret them, take no thought for the morrow.
Right.
And so, the Lord will bless us. Don't even think about it. Just give it away. It came easily and it will disappear. But they put it in the one thing that is so volatile at times, and I'm sure they've got smart people and they're not going to lose that money. But put your trust in the Lord while we put our trust in the stock market.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Right. Consider the lilies of the field. They toil not, neither do they spin, yet your Father in heaven takes care of them. Take no thought for the morrow shall take care of itself. And
Yes.
But that's not what the church has done. And the church has been mostly prudent in the way that they've invested their funds. But the amusing thing about it is, or ironic, is that the church has consistently lagged behind the S&P 500 and its investments. You said you're sure that they have the smart people here running it, but if the church would just follow the S&P 500, they'd have billions of dollars more. So when the church adjusts the weights on the US stock market as far as what they are investing in, the church is often very dim on technology and they're very pro on banking. But we've had a number of unfortunate banking crises over the last couple of years, and it's my opinion that the church leaders are very old, and so they're anti-tech, and that's informed their investment philosophy. But what I would expect to see, Eric, from an organization that is led from a all-knowing and supernatural agent, is that what the church invests in, that they prayed about it, I would expect to see that the church's investments would be doing absolutely gangbusters, unbelievable, assuming that Jesus wants his church to have the maximum amount of money possible. But not only has that not happened, but the church can't even meet the S&P 500. So there's a major problem here with the way that the church currently conducts its investments.
Yeah, I think it is. I assume they did better than that, and so you informed me on that. But when I look at this, the question I ask myself is, that's wonderful, and that would be mismanagement. If what you say is true, by any board, they would want to see a better return on that money. But I look at it in terms of who financed the creation of the world. We're not talking about a corporation, at least in my mind. I didn't know I was talking about a corporation until I realized that a small 15 million member church was actually one of the largest corporations involved in real estate. It had its own businesses and all kinds of things. But I asked the question, who financed the creation of the world? Where did those funds come from? Because if God's going to need these funds for the second coming or at any point, then I don't know where I ended up believing in that God in the first place. And yet when you mention this to certain people who are faithful members, is that they think that fund is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
They sure do. That's where you get the hashtag make it a trillion. And just to back up my information here to make sure that I'm giving you the correct information, this was just the last couple of months ago. The church releases every quarter now the information about at least the U.S. stock market portion of the Ensign Peak portfolio. And in quarter one of 2024, the 13F summaries, which the church failed to file for so long, the Ensign Peak, at least the domestic portion, was at $55 billion. But the 9.7 return lagged the S&P 500, which was at 10.5. So the church did about 1% worse, which when you have $50 billion, that's a significant chunk of cash. The church almost always lags behind the S&P 500. Their investment practices are poor. And that's probably because it's hard to say, really. Honestly, Eric, I really think that the reason why is because the people who run the Berkshire Hathaways and the big time huge investment funds, the Warren Buffetts and these really smart guys, they have hundreds of the world's smartest bankers that are running these funds for them. And what do these bankers do? They go out and meet with Apple and Tesla and Nvidia, and they go to the board of directors meetings literally every single week. They have somebody there so that they can tinker with the formulas so that they can absolutely maximize down to the very last percentage how much money they're getting on these massive hedge funds. Have you ever heard of a Mormon banker leaked that they were meeting with Apple or meeting with Steve Jobs or were doing anything? We have no leaked knowledge of any Ensign Peak advisors. Even David Nielsen never said that he went out and did any of these things. What the church basically does is that they have a philosophy that we're going to invest in these things, and then they just leave it up to whatever happens. That's not proper investment strategy. That is a poor strategy, and that's why the church consistently lags behind. People are saying that, yes, Ensign Peak for years ran a sham of an operation that was absolutely ridiculous, but even today it continues to be mismanaged. These are not good stewards of the widow's mite.
Well, you know what? You've looked into that way more than I have. I made assumptions, which we all had to do because the information is not available.
Right.
But yeah, I mean that is interesting information. But regardless of whether it's growing at a certain rate, is that I can't imagine that. I mean, like I said, we're not talking about a corporation. We're talking about who we believed, who most of us are in this situation. We believed wholeheartedly that God was the creator of both heaven and earth. And there was no secret bank account that was funding that. Is that they did that with their power and their glory. and just all of those simple, basic things that the Creator could do with His infinite wisdom and power, and yet the church can't follow the scriptures of the New Testament and the scriptures that tell us how to not take thought, not hoard our money, not do things, but yet justify violation of those scriptures, claiming it is for that same God who just seems to be a corporate God. There must be corporate zones throughout the universe that He collects His rent money from, or whatever. Because I can't even comprehend that one penny is needed for anything that He wants to do, when His stated goal is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man.
Yeah, it betrays an incredible lack of faith from senior church leaders. Because remember, in Jesus, if we were to take Jesus's sayings in the New Testament as authoritative, and that they've been transmitted to us correctly, only one time was Jesus ever asked, "What shall I do, Master, that I may obtain eternal life?"
Yes,
He was only asked that once. And it was the rich man who and then Jesus said, you need to love your father, honor thy mother, and obey all of the commandments, the law of Moses, that kind of stuff. And he says, this have I done since I was a youth. And he said, well, then take all of your possessions and sell to the poor and follow me. And the rich man went away sorrowing, for he had many possessions. And the irony here is that the church is now the rich man with so many possessions. And the church leaders have said, we've been good all of our lives. We haven't drinking coffee. We never drank coffee. We never smoked. We never did any of these things. And if we are to believe Jesus's teachings there, that we are supposed to sell all of our possessions, give to the poor,
give it to the poor,
and alleviate human suffering. But instead, the church has taken it for itself, because the church has if you look at the Gospel Topics essay that the church put out with regards to church finances, what that essay tells us is that the church, it highlights all of the times that the church has been almost insolvent over the years. It was almost insolvent in Kirtland/Nauvoo. It was mortgaged to the hilt. Then when the Edmunds-Tucker Act came out in the 1880s and the federal government seized all of the church's land and assets and tithing and welfare square, it would almost went insolvent there. And then in the late 50s with David O. McKay, it almost went solvent again. And what that Gospel Topics essay tries to justify is saying, we've had it really bad a couple of times. We almost went out of business 3 times. And that therefore justifies the hoarding of the amount of money that the church has now. But that is a faithless endeavor and is a bad argument, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be saying that if it was Apple. I wouldn't be saying that if it was another corporation. But when I'm talking about the person that I believe to be God and His Son, Jesus Christ, who had a singular mission, that just does not fly, to not have that faith. I mean, you could give every penny of that away, and these faithful members would step up. I mean, they would pay more. They would pay 20% if they truly felt that the Lord was behind it. But yet what we see is people walking away from the church because they can see the hypocrisy. I mean, many can't see the hypocrisy, but when you do see it, you can't unsee it.
One thing that I think that the church leaders really look at is basically kind of like the actuarial tables of tithing. As the North American members of the church has really struggled in the United States. For instance, California used to be one of the engines of new converts. And instead, California is one of the areas in which Mormonism is dying at the fastest rate. There's only been approximately 50,000 people in all of the United States that have been baptized as converts in the last 2 years. So what we've seen is people who pay a high socioeconomic status in the United States replaced by poor Africans who pay almost no tithing. And probably those congregations in Africa are partially subsidized by the church. In other words, they're not a net positive for tithing receipts to go to Salt Lake City. And they're looking at the projections here of what is going to happen in the future as Mormonism, the shrivel is real, and wealthy tithe payers are replaced by people who pay almost no tithing, and that terrifies them. Do you feel that or no?
Well, you know what? Sadly, if that's what their conditioning is for them to look at, that is sad. And I think that's a reality. What you say, I think, is the reality. But I mean, once again, we're talking about the creator of heaven and earth, whose singular mission is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man, to accept Jesus Christ as their savior and redeemer. What do those things matter? If you have the penny and you throw it at that problem, that's wonderful. But if you have that problem that exists and you still decide that it's important to to invest it in the most worldly thing you can, the stock market, and then just hoard it for the rainy day that supposedly revelation is going to dictate how you spend it. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, let's keep going. I got a couple more clips here. Elder Faust, get out of poverty by paying tithing. Is that a thing? Well, I before I did the research on this, I didn't realize how often this teaching was brought out. And Jacob probably subscribes. I'm almost sure that he subscribes to a prosperity gospel. So let's hear what Elder Faust has to say.
Why should members worldwide, many of whom may not have enough for their daily needs, be encouraged to keep the Lord's law of tithing? As President Hinckley said in Cebu in the Philippine Islands, if members, even living in poverty and misery, will accept the gospel and live it, pay their tithes and offerings, even those be meager, they will have rice in their bowls and clothing on their backs and shelter over their heads. I do not see any other solution. Some may feel that they cannot afford to pay tithing, but the Lord has promised that he would prepare a way for us to keep all of his commandments. To pay tithing takes a leap of faith in the beginning. But as Jesus said, if any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine. We learn about tithing by paying it. Indeed, I believe it is possible to break out of poverty by having the faith to give back to the Lord part of that little we have. Members of the church who do not tithe do not lose their membership. They only lose blessings. Through Malachi, the Lord asks, will a man rob God? But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. If we will trust in the Lord, he will open the windows of heaven to us as we give back to him 1/10 he asks of us. His promise is sure. I will pour you out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it.
Hey, what's your reaction to James Faust's talk here?
You know, there's part of me that wants to believe that, you know, that my grandfather said, pay your tithing and you'll never have a want in your life, you know, and I looked up to my grandpa and I believe that he reinforced that teaching in my life, and it's a beautiful thing. But having not paid my tithing, I can see that is a fear that was placed in me from the very beginning of my life. And I don't think that the threat or the downside of that is a reality. I think that much can be done in this world through good by helping other people and not paying into a tithing fund that seems to only benefit, only benefit the church and apparently God in some future day. So that's the difficult part.
Yes, the churches, and the amazing thing about Ensign Peak is that it basically has only helped the church twice. It helped by building a luxury mall, and it helped by bailing out an insurance company. So who is it currently helping? Who Ensign Peak is currently helping is the egg-headed stockholders of Tesla, Microsoft, Apple. It's going into Elon Musk. This is the crazy part about this, Eric, is that when you give a donation to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, some of that donation just gets plowed into Ensign Peak, and that it ends up in Elon Musk's back pocket.
Yes.
Not helping poverty. Yeah. You're literally helping some of the richest men in the world, because if you look at the top holdings in Ensign Peak, it's all of the billionaires like Bill Gates and all of these other eggheads. It's the exact opposite of what you would expect that you would be doing with your donation, and that obviously causes a lot of people a lot of problems.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I would want Jacob to answer to, because you cannot have a charitable fund made up of what used to be shell companies, and have it be a charitable organization and do no charity work with that. I mean, that is if it was a hole, if it was a well that you just dumped that money in and it was never coming out, except for the leaders knew where the secret stash was when they needed to bail out the beneficial life and build them all. Because there was no intention of using it on a daily basis for reaching out to anyone in poverty with that fund.
Yes.
Anyone nothing was built in Salt Lake with those funds in terms of the homeless and so yes, I mean, nothing about it makes any sense.
Yeah, and the most amazing thing is that in that last talk, James Faust was talking about the Cebu Temple and how people there were in really crushing poverty. And my friend over there at the Cultural Hall, who does the parody website, the parody YouTube channel over there, he served his mission not far from here. And the most amazing thing is that this particular video talks about that Cebu Temple. And it says that we have the Cebu Philippines Temple here, a multi-billion-dollar temple built on 11.5 acres. And there's the inside of the temple there. And if you look right outside here, what do you notice here, Eric, about how much the poverty is? Is the prosperity gospel working with this temple?
No. In fact, I think if you were honest, you would get honest comments from those temple workers on what a blight it is outside those temple walls and how grateful they are to be inside those walls every morning when they walk through.
Yeah, affluence up front and poverty in the rear. It doesn't seem like it's working there, at least in the Cebu Temple, even though James Faust said that it would.
Yeah.
And
well, another thing, if you got some, but the other thing I was thinking is that the church also, I don't know if it's if they get the same tax breaks in foreign countries, but when you build a big building like that and you have infrastructure and things that are required to support it, and yet you've given these religious tax breaks, you're actually putting a bigger burden on the individuals that live in that community. And I'm making an assumption that they get those tax breaks in different parts of the world, but even in the United States, people in a community pay for those because the church is exempt.
Right. In some countries, the church has full tax exempt status, but in some countries like United Kingdom, for instance, temples are only given like a 3/4 tax break because they recognize that those buildings are basically a private club, whereas a lot of churches in England get the full tax breaks, but temples do not because they're so exclusive. So I don't know what the state is in the Philippines here, but there's a lot of shame that comes around on this too. It says that in order to receive blessings, that's predicated on the payment of tithing. In other words, if you do not pay tithing, you will not be blessed. And this is basically a fear tactic or a shaming tactic, which tells people that if you don't pay the tithing, then you will end up in sad heaven.
Why does the Lord require his people to pay tithing? The Lord is our Father, and as our Father, he loves us.
They make this assertion that the Lord has commanded tithing. You have to demonstrate that. You can't merely assert it. You have to provide evidence for all of these claims.
He wants to bless us because he loves us, both spiritually and temporally.
How do you know that?
In order to bestow his blessings on his children in a just and equitable manner, the Lord has instituted laws that govern those blessings that he wants all of us to enjoy. He has revealed this principle of laws to his prophet of the restoration. There is a law irrevocably decreed in heaven before the foundations of this world, upon which all blessings are predicated. And when we obtain any blessing from God, it is by obedience to that law upon which it is predicated. And again, I, the Lord, am bound when ye do what I say, but when ye do not what I say, ye have no promise. The Lord knew from the beginning that we, his children, would be faced with temporal and spiritual adversities during this mortal life. Indeed, these adversities are a vital part of this mortal probation. He knew that we would stand in need of his blessings throughout our lives in order to not only survive our individual trials, but also to enjoy a degree of comfort and even prosperity. Thus, the law of tithing, which was instituted from the beginning, we know from the scriptures that Abraham was blessed through his obedience to this law, and we now have that same law as it was reiterated by the Savior during his visit to the inhabitants of this continent.
It's amusing that he references Abraham, who supposedly paid tithes to Melchizedek, but we don't even have good evidence for Abraham's existence at all. This is not evidence that paying tithing brings blessings. I mean, Abraham is one of the most mythical figures. A lot of scholars don't even put any credence at all into his actual existence. This is a bad argument.
Almost 2,000 years ago, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground. Neither shall your vine cast her fruit before her time in the fields, saith the Lord of hosts. And all nations shall call you blessed, for ye shall be a delightsome land, saith the Lord of hosts.
Of course, the problem here is that many people who have paid tithing haven't been blessed. They've had to go through medical bankruptcy. They've lost their job. Yes. They've lost their home. maybe it was in a flood or a natural disaster or all those fires that burned everybody down in Maui. That's the problem here is when you say that these blessings are predicated upon you paying tithing, then some people who pay tithing, they are not blessed. How do you reconcile that? Again, we have promises that are unmet, and that naturally leads to a lot of angst.
Yeah, I wrote something down earlier when I was looking at, because I read what the blessings of the temple claim to be. None of them had anything to do with economics, except for if you just said that the Lord will bless you in all aspects of your life. But like you said, he's not going, I mean, does that mean we're immune from death? Does that mean we're immune from illness? Does that mean we're immune from losing our job? Does that mean we're immune from being displaced because of war? No. So everything about poverty and everything about these downturns is cyclical / just our human experience. And so there's no way to predict it. There's no way to prevent it. There are only aids to help us to maybe climb out of it. And I don't think that temple work, attending an LDS temple, is at the top of that priority list.
I couldn't agree more. Now, David Bednar here. Obedience to tithing isn't enough. It's not even just paying tithing. That's not going to be enough. There's always more with the Mormon gospel. There's so many rules. And even if you pay tithing, according to David Bednar, that's not enough. Let's figure out what else you got to do.
One evening while I was serving as a stake president, I received a telephone call from an angry member of the church who had just finished talking with his bishop. This brother attended church sporadically and had not paid his tithing in many years. Earlier the same evening, this man had walked into the bishop's office, rather matter-of-factly written out a check for his tithing, and then indicated that he wanted to obtain a temple recommend. One of this man's children was to be married in the temple soon, and he wanted to attend the wedding. As the bishop and the man had counseled together, it was clear the man believed that simply paying the money was all that was necessary to obtain a temple recommend. This very wise bishop had commended the brother for starting to pay his tithing. The bishop also told the man that they would talk about worthiness to worship in the temple when the man understood and had repented for the sin of disobedience. The man was not pleased with this counsel from his bishop. The man had said to his bishop, quote, "I wrote out the check. What more do you want?" Close quote. The bishop responded, quote, "My dear brother, writing a check is not repentance. You must recognize and repent of your sin and change your heart. The Lord requires your heart." Close quote. Following his conversation with the bishop, the man called me to complain about the treatment he had received from his bishop. The man was even less pleased with my response. I told him, quote, "Your bishop has counseled you correctly. I advise you to heed his counsel and truly repent." Close.
Okay, so, I mean, even if you pay tithing, which this man did, then that's not enough. You have to give a joyful tithe, apparently, and you can't have any attitude about it. I guess that's what I'm getting from David Bednar.
Yeah. I mean, clearly.
David Bednar always takes things up to the next level, doesn't he? Elder Johnson, those who spend money on personal essentials rather than tithing are unwise stewards. If you have personal essentials, if you have things that you have to spend money on, but you don't pay your tithing first, you're an unwise steward.
There are many reasons that are used to not pay tithing, such as medical emergencies, debts, car and or home repairs, educational expenses, and insurance.
Didn't we already hear this? We already heard this.
We did hear that.
Yeah, we did hear that. What about, okay, we'll skip that one. Now, President Nelson, pay tithing or else you will burn at the day of vengeance.
This will be good.
To develop enduring faith and enduring commitment to be a full tithe payer is essential. Initially, it takes faith to tithe. Then the tithe payer develops more faith to the point that tithing becomes a precious privilege. Tithing is an ancient law from God. He made a promise to his children that he would open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it. Not only that, tithing will keep your name enrolled among the people of God and protect you in the day of vengeance and burning.
Right. So the only people who it's also known as fire insurance. The only people who will be saved when Jesus comes again are people who have paid into Ensign Peak. And to the best available information, that's probably only just a couple of million people, and you have to have paid a full tithe. According to Randy Bell and some other people, there's only about 800,000 active Latter-day Saint adults who have temple recommends who actually use them. See, the amount of people who are going to be burned when Jesus comes again because so many people have not paid into Jesus's secret slush fund is going to be astronomical.
Yeah. When you look at the numbers, it just doesn't make sense. I don't know how we can think that the God that we once worshipped is actually that God. Part of what made me rethink a lot of my religion and Mormonism was just realizing that there were people so much worse off than myself in this world. And that if I prayed and I wanted to find something, or I needed a few extra dollars to make my business or home run or pay for things, and yet if I got down on my knees and prayed, God would answer my prayer. But yet the mother in Africa who just wanted a morsel of food to feed her child before she laid him to bed, and God didn't open up the heavens and give that to her, but yet I could on a weekly basis delineate or enumerate the blessings where the Lord had blessed me. It didn't make sense to me. And so the God that I had to hope for, I don't even know that I believe in God. I just have a hope, and I can look around and I can say there could be a creator, but he has to be completely hands off. And he's not the cause of poverty, withholding all these blessings until we magically join Mormonism when some Mormon missionaries stumble into our part of the world. And forget about all the parts of the world where they will never stumble into. They're never going to walk into the heart of Iraq or Iran or the heart of so many places where God will then work his magic among those people and lead them to pay their tithing and enter into a temple where it's debatable where those temple rituals came from. And it looks like they apparently came from Masonry. I keep harping on that, but how is that our saving grace?
Yeah, let me just cover a couple of these comments. A. Ross, need insulin? Too bad, pay tithing first, because he said no medical expenses. So if your loved one needs chemotherapy, but you cannot afford it because you have to pay tithing, then he's recommending that you pay tithing. That could literally lead to someone dying. And James Bradshaw, Susan's husband is not shy about letting everyone know that they don't have agency anymore in the church. That is certainly one of his pet peeves. And Shannon says, A. Ross, that was my situation, but my bishop never required me to pay tithing over my need to pay for my insulin. Thank goodness. There are definitely some great bishops out there, and we should be grateful for that. Now, President Nelson, when it comes to economic disasters, he also thinks that not only can you get out of poverty, as we mentioned, by paying tithing, but it will help with any economic disaster. Tithing is a panacea.
One of the things you want to teach your children
Una de las cosas que quieren enseñarle a sus hijos
is the importance of tithing.
es la importancia del diezmo.
Take your children with you to the bishop
Lleven sus hijos con ustedes al obispado
when you go to tithing settlement,
cuando van al ajuste anual de diezmos
and let them contribute their little coins
y que ellos contribuyan con sus pequeñas monedas
or small contributions.
o unas pequeñas contribuciones.
Help them to understand what tithing means.
Ayúdenles a entender lo que significan los diezmos.
You have the advantage in the Spanish language of having 1/10 in the word tithing.
Ustedes tienen la ventaja en el idioma español de tener la décima parte en la palabra diezmo.
We don't have that advantage in the English language.
No tenemos esa ventaja en el idioma inglés.
Anything less than a tenth is not tithing.
Algo menor que el 10 no es un diezmo.
It's a donation,
Es una donación,
a contribution,
una contribución.
but tithing is a tenth.
Pero el diezmo es un 10%.
By definition.
Por definición.
Well, when your children can say honestly to their bishop, I am a full tithe payer,
Cuando sus hijos puedan decirle honestamente al obispo, yo soy un pagador íntegro de diezmos,
they qualify for all the blessings that God has in store for the tithe payers.
se califican para todas las bendiciones que Dios tiene guardadas para los pagadores de diezmos.
So teach tithing.
Así que enseñen el diezmo.
I remember in the year 2002,
Recuerdo que en el año 2002,
when there was an economic crisis here in Argentina.
cuando había una crisis económica aquí en Argentina.
You remember that, don't you?
Ustedes recuerdan eso, ¿no es cierto?
Well, President Hinckley said to me, go down to the saints in Argentina and help.
El presidente Hinckley me dijo a mí, vaya a los santos en Argentina y ayude.
Of course, I said, I'll do whatever you ask me to, President.
Por supuesto, le dije, voy a hacer lo que usted quiera, presidente.
And then as I got ready to get on the airplane,
Y al prepararme para subir al avión,
I said, what shall I do to help the people of Argentina?
yo dije, ¿qué tengo que hacer para ayudar a la gente de Argentina?
President Hinckley said,
El presidente Hinckley dijo,
teach tithing, of course.
enseñen los diezmos, por supuesto.
So I came here and taught tithing
Así que vine aquí y enseñé sobre los diezmos,
when you couldn't get money out of the bank.
cuando ustedes ni podían sacar plata de los bancos.
Well, let your children qualify for that great blessing.
Que vuestros hijos califiquen para esa gran bendición.
So let me get this straight. We're in a major economic downturn in Argentina. And instead of, at this time, that the church, this is President Hinckley. Remember, he was the president of the church from about 1995 until 2008. The church is worth at this time, in Ensign Peak, is probably worth $10 to $15 billion, and the church's total evaluation is $40 billion. The church has the incredible ability here to really come down and help some people who are really, really hurting. And did President Hinckley tell Russell Nelson to come down with the purse strings and get ready to hand out a bunch of checks and, tell the stake presidents, area presidents to really help the people? No. What did he tell them to do? He said that in the middle of an economic downturn, to pay tithing back to church headquarters. That's how much he believes in this prosperity gospel thing.
Yeah. And I mean, the Mormon in me thinks I still think how beautiful it would be. There's no question, but sadly, he's asking the poorest of the poor to feed the richest of the rich.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting that. That is absolutely fantastic way of putting it. But the church, look, there's a couple last things, articles that I want to put out here. Number one, I covered this on the Mormon News Roundup last year, and there's been some movement in international countries in particular that have passed laws against regressive donation practices by certain religions. So this was in 2022 in Japan. A new law in Japan takes aim at unification churches' coercive fundraising tactics. And we've seen this in a couple of different countries. So they passed a law here that says that you can't solicit donations under threat of damnation, or you can't solicit donations and promise salvation. That's what the law that was passed here in Japan said, which is what like the Unification Church did. And we've also seen this passed in a couple of other countries, because we have a lot of religions in these mostly secular countries that are promising either eternal salvation by having lots of donations or promising damnation. And I think what I have seen here, Eric, is the church really react to the laws internationally by changing the way of their messaging of the tithing. And this is how they're doing it here for instance, in President Nelson's last address here. Let me play this for you, and we're going to see how, in my opinion, the church is reacting to the secularization internationally and changing its messaging on tithing. And we'll get this from President Nelson himself.
You love attacks truth, thinks celestial, and don't question your testimony. The Apostle Paul prophesied that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. There is no end to the adversary's deceptions.
I just want to jump in here real quick. It's amusing here that he cites 1 Timothy chapter 4, and he says that came from the Apostle Paul. But guess what we know about the epistle of Timothy here, Eric? That's of absolute dubious authenticity. So there's 6 epistles of Paul that we know or have a high degree of confidence that he wrote. And there's 7 of them that have very dubious authenticity. And 1 Timothy is one of the most dubious of all of the epistles. But apparently President Nelson doesn't realize that. And he says that Paul wrote it, even though the best biblical scholarship is to the contrary. President Nelson doesn't know his Bible. And the other thing is, you remember his famous lazy learner and lax disciple talk? Do you remember
Absolutely.
that one? He quotes the Gospel of Hebrews in that talk and ascribes that to Paul as well. And even the most rudimentary kid knows that the epistle of Hebrew is not even attributed to Paul. So Nelson just sees in the Bible an epistle, and he just assumes that it's written by Paul. He hasn't done his homework. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But we're supposed to take him as God's own emissary. You need to brush up on your Bible there, Rusty. Come on, you can do better than that. And this is the thing: somebody needs to proofread these conference talks. How is it that nobody catches these little errors like 1 Timothy being written by Paul when that's of dubious authenticity? Nobody checks President Nelson because he's supposed to be the prophet. Oops, he blew it.
Yeah.
Please be prepared. Never take counsel from those who do not believe.
Whoops, never take counsel from those who don't believe you. I mean, not even your podiatrist? I mean, not even your gardener? I mean, that's a pretty regressive take.
Seek guidance from voices you can trust.
Yeah, namely him. So the voices you can trust is a circular argument. In other words, you can only trust me and my associates. It's like a tautology.
Prophets, seers, and revelators.
Right.
And from the whisperings of the Holy Ghost.
Hi everyone, Nemo here. Russell M. Nelson's talk from the recent October 2023 General Conference has sparked much debate and discussion online. Many who try to defend the more divisive things he said are offering clarifying statements and excuses, in the form of things like what he was actually trying to say was, but there is a problem with this. Russell M. Nelson is capable of qualifying and clarifying his own statements, and in fact, in this very talk, he did just that.
When I was a young intern, my income was $15 a month.
So this is very important. He's going to talk about the prosperity gospel here in his General Conference talk. And this is just recently. This is 2 general conferences ago, because you can recognize his beady red eyes. Now, he recorded this in advance into an empty conference center. But this is an important talk about tithing and the way that I believe that President Nelson has changed how he approaches it.
One night, my wife, Dancel, asked me if I were paying tithing on that meager stipend. I was not. I quickly repented and began paying the additional $1.50 in monthly tithing. Was the church any different because we increased our tithing? Of course not. However, becoming a full tithe payer changed me. That's when I learned that paying tithing is all about faith, not money. As a full tithe payer, the windows of heaven began to open for me. I attribute several subsequent professional opportunities to our faithful payment of tithes.
Well, he ascribes them, and that's on faith, yes. But it's contingent upon him to demonstrate a causality if he wants to espouse this doctrine, which he does not do. You can take anything on faith, which is why it's inherently unreliable.
He then went on to qualify this, but only in the written footnotes of his talk. This is not to imply a cause and effect relationship. Some who never pay tithing attain professional opportunities, while some who pay tithing do not. The promise is that the windows of heaven will be opened to the tithe payer. The nature of the blessings will vary.
Okay, Eric, what do you get from that footnote that appeared only in the General Conference talk afterwards? What are you getting from that?
This is not to imply a cause and effect. I mean, this is not to apply a cause and effect. I mean, you can draw your own conclusions, but please, it's not cause and effect, because we can't stand behind that.
Right. We can't demonstrate it, and we don't want to give the illusion. This is important. The church has been sued so many times about tithing. It doesn't want to give anybody the idea that if you pay tithing, then you will be blessed in any demonstrable way, because otherwise a church member could say, I pay tithing. They promised that this would happen, but it didn't. So they clarified it in the footnotes.
Yeah.
The footnotes for these talks are written at the same time as the talks themselves. So it isn't the case that he realized after giving the talk that it was going to lead people to believe in a cause and effect relationship, and therefore he clarified it using footnotes. He knew from the get-go that people would infer a cause and effect relationship, and instead of clarifying that in his talk verbally, in the medium through which the message would be initially received, he decided to bury it in the footnotes in the written format for plausible deniability. He's happy to let people believe that the cause and effect he implied is universal, so that they will pay tithing. But should he be challenged on it, he can point to the footnotes and say, I told you, your mileage may vary. But
right. So in the conference talk, he's willing to tell all the members. But in case the lawsuit comes up, he can point to the footnote. That's very clever.
The legalese in the church today is just mind-boggling.
It's very shrewd.
Let me know in the comments below the like button. Do people often read the footnotes after the fact? How often do you or did you used to revisit the written conference talks and look at the footnotes?
Did you ever look at the footnotes there, Eric?
No, sir.
No, I didn't either.
Because I think that God was speaking directly through a prophet, and I didn't need to look at the footnotes.
Exactly.
General conference talks are first delivered in a spoken medium. Written footnotes ought to be for attributing credit to quotes or ideas, rather than for qualifying statements, because those qualifying statements won't be received by the primary audience, at least not on the initial receipt of the address. Here's an example of Russell M. Nelson using a footnote for attribution.
Please do the spiritual work to increase your capacity to receive personal revelation.
The footnote to that comment? Russell M. Nelson's own April 2018 General Conference address. It's not enough that everyone else has to quote Nelson ad nauseum. He's even quoting himself. Even so, his use of the footnotes to provide clarifying statements does show us that he is capable, if not in the spoken moment, then certainly in the footnotes, of clarifying his statements of his own accord and adding nuance where necessary. This means that apologists and others online can stop trying to justify what he meant when he said,
"Never take counsel from those who do not believe."
because he has proven himself capable of making clarifying statements, and so the lack of such a clarifying statement in this instance shows that he made a clear statement and there is nothing else to be read into it. He truly wants members to not take counsel from those who do not believe. I don't need to explain to you the harm this will do in mixed faith marriages, and many online are reporting that their relationship with their believing spouse has deteriorated in the aftermath of this talk. But this is part of the broader in-group, out-group, us versus them narrative that is pervasive in the LDS Church.
President Russell M. Nelson has taught, the time is coming when those who do not obey the Lord will be separated from those who do.
And so if you want to support me in continuing to challenge that narrative, as well as challenging the leaders of the church...
I appreciate that, Nemo. What is your reaction to what Nemo is bringing up about the use of the footnotes in the tithing and President Nelson's talk?
Well, I mean, footnotes are always helpful for any of those studious people who aren't lazy learners like I was. But but when it really points out that it's just a legalistic bullet point, and that he doesn't really mean what he's saying because of, like you said, the legal ramifications of making a false claim, then it's like, oh my goodness, they don't even believe it.
Yeah, that's true. Now, one of the other talks that we brought up, it was from, I believe, Elder Johnson, who talked about even the children who had to pay the pennies, or was that Elder Nelson who said that even the pennies?
I don't remember.
Yeah. So, but the thing about church tithing with the kids is that it's actually kind of a double dip if you really think about it. When taking tithing from youth and primary, just thought of a simple example from my childhood. My parents were and are completely faithful tithe payers, the type that subscribe to the lie perpetrated by top leaders that we can't afford not to pay tithing. So I know that when I get my allowance or money for doing my extra chores, they had already paid tithing on it. We're talking about young kids here, right?
Yes.
So the $20 that my dad handed to me, it used to be $22 because he paid $2.22 on the tithing, right? And now it's about to become $18 since the kid has to pay the tithing on it too, because the kid follows his parents' example and pays 10% on every cent. So the church has skimmed $4.22 off of the $22 that my dad earned for an overall rate of 19% tithing. That's pretty shrewd, isn't it?
That is they're very shrewd, among many other shrewd things the church does with their finances.
Yes, indeed. And I we don't have time to go through it now, but one of the church's most amazing videos out there is the Journey to Become. And I have released that onto the Mormon News Roundup channel. If you have never seen the Journey to Become, it is a video to behold. I'll just show you I'll just show you a little bit of it. But Journey to Become is one of the church's only films out there which really deals with tithing. If you think back to the church, they almost never talk about tithing in their official films, but they did in this one. And what this family is, this is the Meller family. And what this video brings out, and this has been banned off of YouTube and some other places here. This is the Mellers, and they're a very wealthy family here. You can see them, and it was released by the LDS Philanthropies. There's Brother Meller, who's the priesthood holder of the family. He has a couple of kids, and his wife. He's a big-time millionaire, big-time. He earned his money in engineering, as I came to find out. I actually sent him an email about this review. But in this review here, what the Meller family decides to do with the church's help is that they decide that they're going to disinherit their children if they are not full tithe payers and that they are drinking coffee. So what the church encourages the parents of this family to do is to disinherit the kids if they don't have temple recommends. So the way that this works is you set up the church as in your will. And when the time comes that Brother Meller passes away, the church will then, the agents will then check the temple recommends of the kids. And if they don't have a temple recommend, they will be disinherited and all the money will then be triggered and left to the church instead. It's basically like a trigger mechanism here. So the church gets all the money in the long run in this officially produced church video, which espouses this idea as a good thing. Because if the kids keep tithing, eventually that'll whittle it down to zero too. So no matter what, the church is going to get all of the money from the Meller family. And that's the idea that they want to send out to everybody is this is a good idea to disinherit your kids if they start drinking coffee. What do you think?
Well, I think that's very sad. So instead of trusting their kids, that they've taught them good principles and they allow them to govern themselves, they're going to allow a church to step in and punish them, and or turn the kids into liars for the rest of their lives. So they're living a false life. They're going through the motions, and they're all setting up because they don't trust their kids, and somehow they feel righteous by adopting this program that the church has put out that will, like you said, that will ultimately benefit the church.
Yes, indeed it will. I just want to play one clip on from it because this was eventually discontinued because it was an absolutely outrageous and atrocious film. It's one of the worst Mormon movies of all time. It really makes my top 10 list. If you haven't watched The Journey to Become, you should watch my review on it because it is very present. But let's just hear just a little bit about what the church... See, what the church does in this, Eric, is it sounds really bad for a general authority or an apostle to tell people over the pulpit, disinherit your children if they don't have a temple recommend and leave all the money to the church. That sounds horrible. So instead of doing that, they make this faith promoting movie and they put those words into the mouth of our protagonist here, Brother Meller, who will say what the general authorities want to say, but can't because it sounds horrible. Let me just play this clip. Yeah, go ahead.
But it's also an advertisement for their charitable remainder trust program that they offer to the most wealthy members of the church.
Yeah.
Who they know based on their tithing receipts have the funds that they want their grubby hands on.
The crazy thing about it, Eric, and I'll admit this to you right now, and we only got 55 people watching. By the way, watching. If you can hit the like, if you can hit the subscribe, hit the notifications, I'd appreciate that. But
I'm sorry I've scared off your usual crowd.
No, this is fine. It's all good. The LDS Philanthropies actually called me on the phone last year because my will still has LDS Philanthropies in it. And I guess every so often they call you up, and I have 10% of my will that goes towards the church. And I still have not updated that. So if I kick the can during this live stream, the church is still going to get that 10% from me. And that's what they encourage you to do. I have a long story that goes along with that, but I'm not going to get into it now. I haven't updated my will so far. I mean, I guess the church can take a couple more bucks from me. It's not a big deal.
You need a new benefactor.
I haven't updated it.
My way or the highway?
Wow, what happens if somebody receives a pile of money who's not living gospel principles? And I don't know about you, but I've never heard anybody say, wow, I inherited a bunch of money and so I decided to go back to church and turn my life around.
You know, Brother Meller, I've never heard of someone whose self-righteous father disinherited them who then decided to go back to church either. I haven't heard of that either. You know, remember, also, turning your life around means going back to church. Those are synonymous. You're outside of the church, you must turn your life around. So anyone outside of the church, they need to turn their lives around. You can't live a good life outside of the church. You're struggling. You're in the church, you're fantastic. You're out of the church, you're struggling. The church is a one-size-fits-all mandatory organization that works for everyone in the planet. And Reed gives no space for the idea that the church is not going to work for someone. No. The church, it works for everyone. And if the church is not working for my sons, well, then that's their fault. And they're going to be disinherited.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I used to worry if I died today, what would happen to my kids? And how would money or prosperity affect their choices and their ambitions and their life's goals? And that caused me a lot of stress. In fact, at one point, I was ready to sign over everything I had to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, rather than risk having them have to make choices that would be difficult for them with a large sum of money.
Okay, Reed, he really says I. He says me. He uses the first person a great deal on this short. These are not really joint decisions between Reed and Lauren, or a decision that their entire family makes together. They're in the picture. We see them there. But this is the don't be mistaken. This is the Reed Meller show. Now, he's talking about signing over all of his wealth to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's specifically referencing the covenants that he and Lauren have presumably made in the temple, specifically the law of consecration. So Reed here, he's actively toying with the idea in front of his own sons of disinheriting them. Right there, while they're right there. Now, remember, whether these sons turn out to be worthy Melchizedek priesthood holders or not, he has no trust in them at all. He doesn't trust them at all. And he's not afraid to admit that with them on the camera right there.
Yeah.
He's really, really obsessed with what the kids are going to do with his wealth after his death. Let me just give you a humble piece of advice, Brother Meller, in case you ever watch this. Consider the lilies of the field. Take no thought for the morrow. Jesus didn't leave anyone anything after his death.
And some friends who work with a lot of donors in the church mentioned, well, what are your goals as a family? And
okay, what are your goals?
Here's the commercial.
I would submit that his goals as a family is to create clones of himself. People who think like he thinks, do what he does, attend the same meetings that he attends, go to the same places on Sundays, give tithing to the same corporation in perpetuity, etc. The idea that the Meller boys should find their own path through life or become something different, or heaven forbid, even better than their father, that's unacceptable. No.
And I said, my goal is to raise worthy Melchizedek priesthood holders.
Right. Yeah. So his goal is to create worthy Melchizedek priesthood holders. The goal is not to teach our boys to be good to others, to be kind, to be tolerant, to find happiness, to determine their purpose, to better the world. The only thing that matters, the only thing that truly matters is church attendance and holding a temple recommend. Don't let all of the service that we've seen so far fool you. That's smoke and mirrors. That's not the goal. The goal is for Reed to clone himself.
And this kind gentleman, Ron Black, said, what if you can do both?
Okay, so what if you can do both? Now here, I found...
Yeah, so I don't want to run you through it. Basically, what if you can do both? What if you can ensure that your kids never get a penny of your money if they don't have a temple recommend? What if you can, or you can just leave it to the church? And that's what the entire movie espouses, is that you should disinherit your kids if they drink coffee. I mean, this is the mentality of the church. You want to know how you become a $300 billion corporation? Number one is by making sure that you pound these messages home of where you disinherit kids and leave it all to the church. There've been so many wealthy Mormons that have left so much money to the church. Number two, you ramp up the guilt and the shame on the tithing. You tell them that they will be burned in the second coming. You tell them that they can't even feed their own kids before they pay the church. You even get the money out of the little kids with the little coins. And it doesn't matter if there's an economic crisis, you need that money to come in. And number three, you have shrewd investments with the real estate portfolio that the church has. It's a kind of a triple whammy. What are your thoughts here on the journey to become? We only watched a little bit of it here, but what do you think here, Eric?
I think I've gotten enough, but I may have to go watch it. But he even took them out into the lone and dreary wilderness to threaten them and give them a taste of what they're in for if they dare go against his priesthood.
Yes, indeed. Right in front of him. Now, the interesting about the rest of this movie, which we didn't watch, is that he has two other daughters, and they fell off of the covenant path. And so he has no contact with them. They're not a part of his life. Not only is he going to disinherit their kids if they go off the covenant path in the future, but if they do so in the time present, they're dead to him. He has no contact with them because they made choices contrary to his will. And don't forget, this is an official church-produced video that espouses the idea that you should cut your kids off even in this life if they're not living up to your the Mormon perfection. And then if they, it's just absolutely repugnant.
They're projecting the love of money on God. But the love of money has driven a wedge between himself and his daughters.
Yeah, it definitely has. And there's a couple of other things here. I guess I'm going to let you go there, Eric. I really appreciate you coming on there. I got a couple last things I'm going to go through, but thanks for those documents. I'm going to read those.
Good luck.
Really appreciate it.
Good luck on your debate.
I thank you so much. I appreciate it, sir. Thanks for coming on. I just got a couple last things that I'm going to go over here, folks. So number one is, why does the church keep its wealth secret? And I've got this Wall Street Journal excerpt that I want to go over. I only got a couple last things to go through. It's getting kind of late here on the East Coast, but that's okay. Why does the church keep its wealth secret anyway?
Leaders, why the numbers are so secret? They got one explanation from Bishop Gerald Cossé, who presides over the fund.
On the question of how much, we are not going to be able to answer all the questions that you ask about specific numbers.
Yeah, he's not going to answer any questions about specific numbers.
Okay. Those funds for us are sacred, and so the members of the church have a great faith in the fact that they are managed with great care and wisdom, and they are all only used for the purpose of the church.
According to the best available information, Ensign Peak wasn't used at all for almost anything for 22 years. Yes, they do have great faith in it. As I mentioned earlier, the church doesn't use the proper oversights on Ensign Peak, which is why it's trailed the S&P 500 so often. And David Nielsen said that Ensign Peak didn't even have compliance officers in it for the first 6 years. It's not managed well, which is why the church was fined $5 million. Gerald Causet is an absolute joke of a manager.
I cover the financial world. It is not common for investment pools of this size to not share how much money that they manage.
So what we can share with you, and thank you for your questions. The faithful members of the church donate several $billions a year. And those are tithes and offerings, so we treat them as sacred. We don't flaunt them. We don't throw them out for public review and critique.
After they left the sit-down interview with church officials, they caught Roger Clark in the lobby.
He gave a different answer about why they've been so secret about the fund that I think was very illuminating, about their fear that if members knew how much money the church had, they would think twice about tithing.
That's very important here. And again, Roger Clark is the head of Ensign Peak here. And that was the most telling quote from the entire Ensign Peak debacle. And according to my sources, that is the exact quote that got Roger Clark fired from Ensign Peak. And he had to leave church employment 4 years later after being a church employee for 25 years because he said the quiet part out loud, that the entire Ensign Peak debacle was engineered so that the church members would never have a reason not to give a donation. Roger, thanks for at least telling us the truth, but you're an absolute piece of trash as a human being.
Paying tithing is more a sense of commitment than it is the church needing the money.
Yeah, the church doesn't need their money. Again, Roger Clark, at least he speaks the truth in these interviews.
And so they never wanted to be in a position where people felt like, they shouldn't make the contribution.
Because the church didn't need it.
Yeah. So I think that may have played some part in it.
That could have played all part in it. That was the entire reason. Why would you break the law just to not tell the government for some reason? That's the only reason that this absolutely happened. Okay, a couple last things here to take us out. You can see that my tabs up here are getting short here. So let's just cover this. I don't know if this is going to give me a YouTube strike or not here, but John Oliver takes a shot at the Mormon gospel of prosperity. And since I'm preparing for Jacob Hansen, who apparently believes in a prosperity gospel, let's see what John Oliver has to say. I actually saw John Oliver. He came to Washington, D.C., and my wife and I went to his comedic show, and he is perfectly my level of humor. It's somewhat highbrow, but not too far up there, and super funny. He lampoons American culture, and he's got the British accent. He's super hilarious. It was a very intimate night, and I really remember it. The tickets were kind of expensive, but it was fun. I did see him in person. Let's see what he has to say about the Mormon gospel of prosperity.
Churches are a cornerstone of American life. There are roughly 350,000 congregations in the United States, and many of them do great work, feeding the hungry, clothing the poor. But this is not a story about them. This is about the churches who exploit people's faith for monetary gain. Let me show you that in action.
The size of your seed will determine the size of your harvest. I don't understand why, but there's something happens at a level where people step into faith and give $1,000 that don't happen at other levels.
You know, we're going to see in this clip here, it's been a long time since I've watched it, but there's so many parallels between Mormon church leaders and evangelical church leaders, and especially these televangelists who give these incredible, harmful messages, especially to these, let's be honest, these little old ladies who give them all of their money in their retirement savings. There's a level of charlatanism that is common among these religious leaders that really turns my stomach.
You're going to have a breakthrough through this $273 seed.
All you've got is $1,000. Listen, that's not enough money anyway to buy the house. You're trying to get in the apartment. You're trying to buy the house. That's not enough money anyway. You get to that phone and you put that seed in the ground and watch God work it out.
That's exactly the same message here that we got from the earlier Mormon leaders that we talked about. It doesn't matter if it's your last $1,000. It doesn't matter if you can't pay your rent. You need to send it to me. And here we have Wendy Watson Nelson, President Nelson's second wife, who's going to give us a little bit more information.
Desperate to have more money, we eagerly follow the Lord's law of finances, which is, of course, tithing. Consider President George Q. Cannon's approach to tithing when he was an impoverished young man. When his bishop commented on the large amount of tithing poor young George was paying, George said something like, "Oh, Bishop, I'm not paying tithing on what I make. I'm paying tithing on what I want to make." And the very next year, George earned exactly the amount of money he had paid tithing on the year before.
That's the absolute embodiment of the prosperity gospel right there. We got this from David Bednar earlier, who said that it's not even enough to pay the normal tithing, which is typically 10% of your gross earnings, that you have to do it with a cheerful countenance. Now we're trotting out faith-promoting stories of George Buchanan, who was an early Mormon leader, who said that he paid tithing on what he wanted to make, which is apparently above and beyond the 10%, and that the Lord directly blessed him for that. They always promise the blessings that come from paying tithing, yet we can't connect the supernatural origin of these supposed blessings to our lives. And of course, there's many, many people who paid tithing, and yet they had medical bankruptcies, people lost jobs, or through other circumstances, natural disasters, or whatever else, fell into hard times, and the Lord didn't come to their aid. Well, what about those people? Naturally, what about them?
The argument is, sow your money in the ground and you will reap returns multiple times over. Except, as an investment, you'd be better off burying your money in the actual ground, because at least that way there is a chance your dog may dig it up and give it back to you one day. Good boy. But it can get even more predatory, because if, say, you don't have $1,000 or perhaps have significant debts, seed faith can still work for you.
I have a feeling that somebody that wants a credit card debt wiped out, that if you'll use your faith as you sow the 1,000 on a credit card, as you use your faith, God's going to wipe out your credit card indebtedness.
Let me share an experience from a noble Latter-day Saint in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She tells of her struggle between paying her tithing or her tuition. Here are her words. The university prohibited the students that were in debt or who had not paid their tuition from taking tests. I remember a time, she's quoting her, when I faced serious financial difficulties. It was a Thursday when I received my salary. When I figured the monthly budget, I noticed that there wouldn't be enough to pay both my tithing and my university. I would have to choose between them. The bi-monthly tests would start the following week, and if I didn't take them, I could lose the school year. I felt great agony. My heart ached. Here was a direct conflict between the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God. First, she paid her tithing on Sunday. She made the decision. You will find that you are confronted with these types of tests many times throughout your life. Where will you put your trust?
We hear some these days who say that because of economic pressures, they cannot afford to pay their tithing.
And don't forget that in every single one of these stories, when the people pay the tithing, of course, they're blessed immediately. We never get to hear the story of the person who paid tithing, had faith in the Lord, came upon hard times, and then went bankrupt or lost their home or lost their car or lost whatever. We're only told the faith-promoting narratives. How convenient.
I recall an experience I had as a stake president some years ago. A man whom I knew came to get his temple recommend signed. I questioned him in the usual way and asked, among other things, whether he was paying an honest tithing. He candidly replied that he was not, that he could not afford to because of his many debts. I felt impressed to tell him that he would not pay his debts until he paid his tithing.
Think about that.
And this is important here, is that Gordon Hinckley is the one who founded Ensign Peak. The entire scam was founded by President Hinckley. He was a lovable old man to most of us, but down deep, he was a fraudulent hoarder.
That is the equivalent of saying the key to you losing weight lies at the bottom of this giant Costco bulk bag of peanut butter M&Ms. Go find it. It's definitely down there. And all of this would be amusing if the target of these messages were not often vulnerable people.
No bishop, no missionary should ever hesitate or lack the faith to teach the law of tithing to the poor. The sentiment of they can't afford to needs to be replaced with they can't afford not to. One of the first things a bishop must do to help the needy is ask them to pay their tithing.
After some events related to a civil war in Central America, my father's business went bankrupt. He went from about 200 full-time employees to fewer than 5 sewing operators who worked as needed in the garage of our home. One day, during those difficult times, I heard my parents discussing whether they should pay tithing or buy food for the children. On Sunday, I followed my father to see what he was going to do. After our church meetings, I saw him take an envelope and put his tithing in it. That was only part of the lesson. The question that remained for me was what we were going to eat. Early Monday morning, some people knocked on our door. When I opened it, they asked for my father. I called for him, and when he arrived, the visitors told him about an urgent sewing order they needed as quickly as possible. They told him that the order was so urgent that they will pay for it in advance. That day, I learned the principles of paying tithing and the blessings that follow.
At this point, I think it's clear that seed faith is the most disgusting seed-based concept since whatever the fuck chia seed pudding is.
Yeah, we already watched that where it says you shouldn't pay you shouldn't feed your kids, but instead you should feed the church. Okay, my last one here. Colby Redder sent this to me, who he just posted here, and I want to read this. And this is going to take us out of here because it's getting too late for me. I'm on the East Coast. Apologist Jacob Hansen is an arc-steading hypocrite. It's no secret that I'm no fan of Mormon presuppositional apologist Jacob Hansen of the, in my view, hilariously, ironically named YouTube channel Thoughtful Faith. And for those of you who are not aware, presuppositionalism is basically the idea that you have various axioms that you take that cannot be questioned. And basically, I think what Colby is arguing here is that Jacob is a presuppositionalist, meaning that he takes that the church is true and he's not willing to question that. He was, Shannon said Gordon was his favorite prophet too. Yeah, for all intents and purposes, he was a great leader. If you could wipe out the Ensign Peak, that would go a long way to helping his legacy. But unfortunately, he's the one who brought us that. And continuing with Colby, he said, in fact, I find his pseudo-intellectual Jordan Peterson-like shtick so grating that we did an entire review of his illogical behavior on his positions in his debate with a polygamy denier on an episode of Mormonism Live just a few months ago. I also recently recorded, but it has yet to be released, a response to his recent debate against Catholic apologist Trent Horn regarding whether the Book of Mormon was divinely inspired that I cannot wait to share with all of you. And it appears that we are going to be sharing that with you on Sunday because that is what the poll is trending. So, Fairy Dust like button. Appreciate you joining us. Earlier today, Jacob Hansen released this video attacking polygamy denier Michelle Stone, which I watched. It was a great video, by the way. Jacob does his homework and is very entertaining, which is the reason that he has literally 10,000 more. He has 10 times the subscribers that I do. He's made attack videos like this before against folks like Dan McClellan, John DeLynn, Dan Reynolds, and Dr. Julie Hanks. And according to my sources of information, he has an entire small army that works for him that culls all of the YouTube videos, and then they piece it all together for him, and they have the timestamps that are all queued up, and all he has to come in is give his expert opinions, and he's done. I can tell you that making response videos like this takes a lot of effort, but it certainly helps to have people out there that help you. Continuing. Because it seems that Jacob is entirely incapable of stomaching when someone has a bigger platform to influence church members than he does unless they agree with every opinion of his. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I see where you're coming from. In the video about Stone, who I personally, for the record, consider to be a kind woman but a borderline conspiracy theorist, I would agree with you there 100%. Jacob repeatedly corrects her takes as not being in line with the brethren enough. He also points out that she doesn't sustain the brethren with her audience. Instead, she teaches a divided body of Christ. This is a recurring theme of his videos against the other members of his own church too. Yeah, as I've noticed, Jacob really likes to gatekeep others. You know, he basically engages in almost a no true Scotsman fallacy. You're not a real Mormon unless you believe like he does and unless you worship as he does. But Jacob doesn't just kowtow to the church himself, as he's more than happy to study the ark when he feels the need. Uzzah. Yeah, that's Uzzah in the Old Testament. What is that in Numbers? I believe it's in Numbers, right? Just earlier this year, he made this very bigoted video about his confusion over the church's softer treatment of several trans members. The caption of the video reads, "The church is now allowing men to baptize as women." I am so confused. Yes, and Kulch did a treatment of that particular video in case you missed it. The thumbnail reads, "Divided and Confused." In the video, one of the things Jacob is so confused about is that the church's hiring of LGBTQ ally Aaron Sherinian as head of the church's PR team, because it's so thoughtful to see no issue with the maximally powerful creator of the universe needing a PR team. Yes, Jacob did release the Divided and Confused, which has kind of become... let me see if I can pull this up for you, Jacob Handsome. This thumbnail has become legendary. Divided and Confused. Let me see if I can pull this up here. Yeah, here is the thumbnail here that I can bring to you. Divided and Confused. That's the thumbnail, and that's the video. Who's the most bigoted Mormon apologist and why it's Jacob Hansen? Now, I don't think that's name calling because bigoted is a adjective in that case, and apologist is the noun. But I do think he is the most bigoted apologist without question. Now, I do want to say one thing about Aaron Sherinian before we let you all go here. Aaron Sherinian is absolutely not an ally to the LGBTQ community. He can post as much as he wants on Instagram. He can post as many great gay-friendly posts as he wants. The issue here is when you give a donation to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, knowing that your donation will be used in the public sphere to deny gay persons, trans persons of their rights, because we know the church engages in lobbying. I guess I can take this off. We know that the church engages in lobbying against gay rights. When you give a donation to an organization that you know is going to be using it to deprive people of their rights, you're not an ally. You can't be. It makes no sense. You can't possibly do that. And Aaron Sherinian has a temple recommend. He presumably pays tithing. There's no way they would call him into the church's PR position if he didn't have a temple recommend. Therefore, he pays tithing. If you pay tithing to the church, you're not an ally. Period. Mic drop. End of story. You can pretend to be one, but you're not. It's kind of like saying that you're I don't know, like you're a vegetarian, but you give money to a hunting organization. That just makes no sense. Number two, if you sustain any church leaders that have engaged in LGBTQ bigotry, then you're not an ally. So Aaron Sherinian, if he sustains President Oaks or anybody else who's done harmful messages to the queer community, you're not an ally. And as Aaron Sherinian has a temple recommend and is a PR guy, I assume that he is not casting opposing votes in general conference. That's strike number two. You want to be, are there allies in the church to the gay community? There absolutely are. But those people can't do either of the following things. They can't pay any tithing or give any donations to the church, and they can't sustain any church leader who's given bigoted or anti-gay rhetoric. And the amount of people, therefore, that can consider themselves to be allies who are in the church and hold a temple recommend is virtually nil. Okay? You want my take? I'm giving you my take. Arksteading is in Chronicles. Good to know. And I appreciate Shannon. I appreciate you saying that you agree. Doesn't matter what's posted on your Instagram. Actions speak louder than words. And Aaron Sherinian's actions say that he is aligned with a truly anti-LGBTQ organization. You're just not an ally, buddy. You can pretend it. It's just not the reality. He also highlights how problematic it was for the church to invite a queer activist to even share a stage at BYU. Yeah, there's a video on that Jacob Hansen took great issue with. So what's my point? It's that if you actually watch Jacob's content, he's obviously an Arksteading hypocrite. He seems so incapable of any degree of empathy for other people, their positions, or their legitimate pain that he used the exact same words about his pet cause when he was doing his own Arksteading that he hypocritically accuses Michelle of. Seriously, he used the same words without realizing it. Not even synonyms. The very same word. Jacob's video even includes comments about from the audience of Michelle's YouTube channel, which again, I must observe as nearly 6 times the subscribers that Jacob's own does. And I do this because I'm sure it bothers him quite a bit. Now, my opinion about Michelle Stone's 100,000 subscribers is that I do not believe that for a second that they were legitimately got onto the platform. If you go back and look at Michelle Stone's analytics, there's an insane spike that happens in April, May, and June of this year that does not seem natural to me. It's my opinion, and this is very conspiratorial. There's just no way that an anti-polygamy denial channel can get to 100,000 subs. It's just not that popular of a channel. I mean, even the most faithful LDS podcasts out there, like Hello Saints or Mormon Book Reviews or some of these other ones, they only have like 50,000 subs. I greatly question Michelle Stone's 100,000 subscribers, and I've seen that her videos, what you expect from a channel with 100,000 subscribers is that some of the videos have 1 million views. That's what you expect. But her videos often only have 2,000 or 3,000 views, which is the same as mine. I don't believe that she honestly earned those subscribers. I'm going on a limb here. I think there's something fishy. I can't prove it, but that's my opinion. I spend a lot of time in this space on YouTube. I don't think you're going to find a lot of other Mormon content creators who are familiar with all of these channels. I've had dozens of co-hosts. All of them have YouTube channels. So I'm in this space pretty carefully. I know what I'm talking about. And I don't believe her 100,000 subscriber count is honest. Okay, so where do we left off here? Jacob's video includes comments. Okay, yes, I'm sorry. I lost my place here. From Jacob's own hobby horse video, several of his commenters, and I pulled these from the top 5 comments by popularity, exhibit the exact same behavior he used Michelle's followers' comments to mock. And this is the question. Shannon says, does she buy subs? And that's the big question. Did she buy subs? Or maybe more accurate, did someone buy the subs for her? I don't know. And George Martin says he believes it. Polygamy denial is the only thing keeping a lot of people in the church. Okay, I can agree to disagree with you. I told you it was a conspiracy theory. I don't have any data to back it up, so I'm not sure what to say about that. One thing that I have noticed is when people come over to my comment section on YouTube, a lot of times you can click on the name and it'll take you back to their channel and you can see who they subscribe to, because some people keep it public even though you can keep it private, or you can see their playlists. And I've noticed that people with the most virulent and nasty rhetoric are oftentimes have subscriptions to Ward Radio, Jacob Hansen, and Greg Mattson. If I get somebody really nasty in the comments, I can tell you with a 70% certainty that they come from that neck in the woods. There's something really insidious about the people who watch those channels, and it breeds a really almost nearly a violent rhetoric. In addition to confused, I also feel betrayed and undermined as I try to uphold the truth on these issues with too little church support. I just started coming back to church hoping to raise my son away from this evil so perverse and fraught in this world. If my son isn't safe from this in church, where is he safe? And here's my problem. The church will allow this type of behavior, but I can't have my sweet tea. Things are upside down. And more than just highlighting how dishonest Jacob personally is, at least on this issue, I think this highlights the biggest issue with apologetics in general. Apologists like Jacob will almost inevitably tie themselves into phony pretzels trying to make sense of the nonsensical. It will always devolve into special pleading because there's not a single argument I've heard in defense of one particular take on Mormonism that wouldn't validate other faiths or less fundamentalists Mormons as well. This is on full display through Hansen's seemingly unknowing hypocrisy. And Chuck said that polygamy is a topic that appeals to a lot of non-LDS, but if you look at some of the channels like Growing Up in Polygamy, they don't have nearly the subscribers. I just question it quite a bit. So here's my question for Jacob or anyone similarly minded. Why is your arc-steading on your personal pet peeve somehow allowable, but others' efforts are from Satan? And really what Colby is referencing here is kind of what Jonathan Streeter said is the wood tool, steel tools mentality. A wood tool is something that you give to someone that works for all religions. In other words, most religions make you feel good about yourself. They tell you that you're special and that you have a relationship with a invisible deities, or that you have a soul, or that you will continue on after this life. And you feel good about that. That's a wood tool. But a steel tool helps you differentiate between the truth claims of different religions. And the problem here is that we don't have good steel tools to differentiate between different claims of theists. There's no methodology whereby we can discern who is telling us the truth and who is either mistaken or telling us lies. That's the entire problem. And it really goes back to Jacob Hansen's witness model as well. Because one of the ways that Jacob Hansen throws out the Adam God doctrine is that he says that he looks at all the prophets before Brigham Young, and then he looks at all the prophets after Brigham Young, and Brigham Young was the only one who taught Adam God. Therefore, he can toss it out because he's using a collective witness model. The problem here is that we've got people like Joseph Smith who brought us the endowment, which was never taught before. So if we were using that model, we would have to throw Joseph Smith out. Or we had people like Lorenzo Snow and Wilford Woodruff. Lorenzo Snow said that polygamy would endure forever, and John Taylor did too. But then Wilford Woodruff stopped it. We'd have to throw Wilford Woodruff out. And why did we go from Adam and then Peter, and then why didn't we start back up again with another restorationist movement instead of Joseph Smith? You have to determine who your witnesses are before you come up with your collective model. And that's what Colby was really talking about with presuppositional nonsense, is that Jacob has presupposed that the restoration prophets are the ones that he's supposed to listen to, even though that's not demonstrable. Now, I want to thank you, everyone in here so much for coming on to the Real Talk Mormonism. I had a pleasure talking with my new friend over here, Mr. Eric Rad. If you can hit the like, hit the subscription, I'd really appreciate that. I mean, I made almost 3 hours here, so it's a little too late. Always think celestial, and remember that no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.